Chapter 1. In a country far away from it, you can see a great city in which flourishing trade is the basis of abundance. This city told among its citizens a lucky merchant in their companies, and on which fate, complacent with their wishes, always overturned its best favors. But while I had immense wealth, I also had many children. His family was composed of 6 men and 6 women. Everyone kept living with him. The men were too young to think about becoming independent. The women, too proud of the great goods that they expected to possess someday, could not easily decide about the choice they had to make. His vanity felt flattered by the gallantry of the brightest young people. But a setback of fortune, which they did not expect, upset the serenity of their lives. His house caught fire. The magnificent furniture that filled it, the accounts books, the tickets, the gold, the silver and all the valuable merchandise that constituted the set of the merchant's assets were lost in that dire fire, which was so violent that only very few things were saved. That first misfortune was only the pre-announcement of others. The father, who until then had prospered in everything, lost at the same time, was already, because of shipwrecks or due to the privateers, all the ships he had in the sea. His partners declared themselves insolvent. His representatives in foreign countries were unfaithful. Finally, suddenly fell from the highest opulence in a horrendous poverty. The only thing he had left was a small house in the countryside located in a desert place, more than 100 leagues in the city, in which long periods used to spend. Forced to find refuge away from the tumult and noise, it was there where he led his family, desperate for a similar shock. The daughters, above all, of that unfortunate father, could only face the life they were going to lead in that sad loneliness. For some time they had been excited about the idea that, once the father's project was known, the lovers who had courted would feel more than happy to see that they became less elusive. They imagined that everyone would rival the honor of obtaining the preference. They even thought they had only loved him to find a husband. They did not keep much time in such a sweet mistake. They had lost the most beautiful of their charms, seeing the brilliant fortune of the father disappear as a lightning fortune, and the time they could choose and be chosen had passed for them. The eager crowd of worshippers disappeared as soon as they fell out of favor. The strength of his charms could not retain any of them. Friends were no more generous than lovers. As soon as they were in misery, everyone, without exception, stopped knowing them. They even brought cruelty to the point of blaming them the disaster that had just happened to them. Those with whom the father had had more attention were the first to slander him. They said that he had caused his misfortunes with his misconduct, his prodigalities, and the crazy expenses he had made and let his children. This was how that desolate family could not make another decision than to leave a city in which everyone was pleased to insult their misfortune. Lacking every resource, they locked themselves in their country house, located in the middle of an almost impenetrable forest, and that could have been considered the saddest abode on earth. How many afflictions were forced to endure in that horrific loneliness! They had to decide to work on the most painful tasks. As their condition did not allow them to have someone to serve them, the children of that unfortunate merchant were distributed among them occupations and domestic works. Everyone, rivaling each other, dealt with the tasks that the field imposes on those who want to obtain their subsistence from it. The girls, on the other hand, did not lack work. As peasants, they were obliged to use their delicate hands for all the tasks of country life. Dressed in wool clothes, now lacking everything that could have satisfied their vanity, with nothing to live that what the field can provide, reduced to the strictly necessary, but without losing taste for refinement and delicacy, those girls missed the city and their charms. The very memory of their early years, which had quickly passed in the midst of laughs and games, constituted its greatest ordeal. However, the youngest of them showed, in the shared misfortune, more constancy and resolution. It was seen, with a firmness far superior to that of your age, generously resigned to your situation. Not because I would not have given, at the beginning you show true sadness. Who would not be sensitive to such misfortunes? But after having deplored his father's misfortunes, what best could do but to regain his cheerful character, voluntarily embrace the state of loneliness in which he was, and forget about a world whose ingratitude had suffered along with his family and whose friendship was so convinced that he could not count on adversity. Dedicated to comforting his father, and his brothers with the sweetness of his character and the joy of his mood, what did he not imagine to distract them pleasantly? The merchant had not spared efforts to educate her and her sisters. In those nefarious times, he took out all the benefit he wanted. As several instruments played very well, whom he accompanied with his voice, invited his sisters to follow his example, but his joy and patience did nothing more than sadden them. Those girls, to whom such a great misfortunes returned inconsolable, found in the behavior of their younger sister a MacGyver of spirit, a base of soul, and even weakness, evidenced by the fact of living happily in the state to which the sky had just reduced them. "How happy it is," the greatest said. "It is made for rude occupations. With such low feelings, what could I have done in good society?" Such speeches were unfair. That young woman would have been more capable of shining than any of them. A perfect beauty adorned her youth, a good humor always even made her adorable. His heart, as generous as compassionate, was seen in everything. As sensitive as their sisters to disasters that had just overwhelmed their family, due to a force of mood that is not common in their sex, he could hide his pain and put on top of adversity. So much constancy was seen as insensitivity. But it is very easy to refute a judgment formulated by envy. The lucid people knew her as she was, and everyone hastened to prefer it. In the midst of his highest splendor, if his merit caused him to distinguish it, his beauty caused him to give him the name of Belle. Only known by this name, did you need more to increase the jealousy and hatred of their sisters? His charms and the general esteem he had earned should have allowed him to wait a better situation than his sisters expected. But, affected only by his father's misfortunes, far from making some effort to delay the departure of a city in which he had had so many pleasures, he did everything possible to put it as soon as possible. This young woman showed in solitude the same calm she had in society. To relieve his sorrows, at the rest hours he adorned his head with flowers, and like the shepherds of the early days, the rustic life, making him forget what had most flattered in the midst of opulence, procured him every day innocent pleasures. 2 years had already passed, and that family began to get used to leading a country life when a hope of improvement came to disturb their tranquility. The father received notice that one of his ships, which he thought was lost, had just reached a plenty of charge. He was also told that it was to fear that his agents, abusing his absence, sold the load at a vile price and, through that fraud, took advantage of the good that belonged to him. He communicated this news to his children, who did not hesitate for a moment that such a thing soon put them in a situation of abandoning the place of their exile. The daughters, above all, more impatient than their brothers, believing that there was no reason to expect confirmation, they wanted to start immediately and abandon everything. But the father, more prudent, begged them to moderate their impulses. However necessary, he went to his family at a time when the work of the field could not be interrupted without a remarkable damage. He left the care of the harvest to his children and made the decision to undertake only such a long trip. His daughters, with the exception of the child, had no doubt that they would soon return to his previous opulence. They imagined that, although his father's fortune did not become considerable enough to take them back to the big city, where they were born, it would have enough to make them live in another less flourishing city. They hoped to find people in good tone, have suitors, and take advantage of the first proposition that would be made. Without already thinking about the penalties they had endured for 2 years, even believing, as by miracle, already transported from a mediocre fortune to the bosom of a pleasant abundance, they dared, since loneliness had not made them lose the taste for luxury and vanity, to overwhelm their father with crazy orders. He was commissioned to buy jewels, ornaments, hats for them. They rivaled each other to see which one would ask for more. But the product of the alleged fortune of the father could not have enough to satisfy them. To the Belle, to whom the ambition did not tyrannize, and that it always acted guided by prudence, it was enough with a look to see that if the father fulfilled the orders of his sisters he would be totally useless. But the father, surprised with his silence, said, interrupting his insatiable daughters, "And you, Belle, don't have any wish? What can I bring you? What do you want? Speak without fear." "That, Dad," said that adorable daughter, kissing him affectionately, "I wish something more precious than all the ornaments my sisters ask for. To that I limit my desire. I will be quite happy to be fulfilled. It is the joy of seeing you return with full health." This answer, and how well the seal of disinterest looked, covered the others of shame and confusion. They got so angry that one of them, responding on behalf of all, said with acrimony, "This girl becomes important and imagines that she will distinguish with that heroic affectation. Without a doubt, there is nothing more ridiculous." But the father, tender for his feelings, could not stop showing his joy, turned, even because of the desire to which his daughter was limited, he wanted him to ask for something, and to appease his other daughters, indisposed with her, he threw him in face scholarly indifference to the ornaments, telling him that it was not appropriate to his age and that for everything there was a time. "Well, dear father," she said, "since you order it to me, I beg you to bring me a rose. I love that flower with passion. Since I find myself in these solitudes, I have not had the satisfaction of seeing even only one." That was to obey and, at the same time, want to do not make any expense for her. The day came, however, in which the old man had to let go of the arms of his large family. The fastest one he could, he went to the big city to which he called him the illusion of a new fortune. He did not find there the advantages he could expect. It was true that his ship had arrived, but his partners, who gave him a dead, had taken over him, and the whole load had been dispersed in such a way that, far from entering the full and quiet possession of what could belong to him, to assert his rights he had to endure all imaginable tricks. He was able to overcome them, but, after more than 6 months of efforts and expenses, he remained as poor as before. His debtors had declared insolvent, and barely managed to recover the money invested. That was the end of that chimeric wealth. To make matters worse, in order not to precipitate its ruin, it was forced to start at the least conducive station and with the most frightening time. Exposed on the way to all the inclement weather, he was about to die of fatigue. But when some leagues of his house were seen, of which he had not believed that he would have to go out to run in pursuit of crazy hopes that beautiful had been right to despise, he regained his strength. It would take several hours to cross the forest. Although it was late, he wanted to continue on his way. But the night surprised him, and, transied out of cold and almost buried with his horse under the snow, without knowing, in addition, where he directs his steps, he believed that the last hour had reached him. I didn't see any cabin along the way, although the forest was full of them. A tree hewn by rot was the best thing he found, and it was still a luck that could be crowded in him. That tree, protecting him from the cold, saved his life, and the horse, not far from his master, saw another hole in which, led by instinct, he put himself in the shelter. The night, in that state, seemed extremely long. In addition, tortured by hunger, terrified by the howls of the beasts that passed incessant to him, could a quiet moment be? His sorrows and concerns did not end the night. He barely had the pleasure of seeing the dawn, and the confusion seized it. Seeing the floor completely covered with snow, what path could it take? His eyes did not see any path. Only after a painful walk and frequent falls could find a kind of road, for which he walked more easily. Advancing without knowing where, chance led its steps to the mall of a beautiful castle, which the snows seemed to have respected. It was formed by 4 rows of extremely high orange trees, loaded with flowers and fruits. Statues were placed there without order or symmetry. Some were on the side of the road, others among the trees. All were of an unknown matter, of human size and color, and showed different attitudes and clothing. Most of them represented warriors. Upon reaching the first patio, he also saw an infinity of other statues. The cold suffered did not allow him to examine them. An agata ladder with a chiseled gold railing was the first thing that was offered in view. He crossed several magnificently furnished rooms. A soft heat that felt in them replied from his fatigue. He needed some food, who to go to. That vast and magnificent building seemed to be inhabited only by statues. It reigned in him a deep silence, and yet it did not look like an old palace that would have been abandoned. The rooms, the galleries, everything was open, and no living being was in such a charming place. Tired of touring the rooms of that vast abode, he stopped in a room where he had lit a great fire. Presuming that he was prepared for someone who would soon appear, he approached the fireplace to warm up. But nobody arrived. While waiting, he sat on a sofa that was close to the fire. A sweet dream closed his eyelids and left him incapacitated to observe if someone arrived in surprise. Tiredness had caused his rest, hunger interrupted him. More than 20-4 hours ago that tormented it. The exercise it has just done since it was in that palace further increased its needs. When he woke up he had the pleasant surprise to see, when he opened his eyes, a table served with the greatest refinement. A light lunch could not be content, and the sumptuously seasoned dishes invited him to eat everything. His first concern was to thank those who treated him so well, and then, to wait quietly for their guests to deign to be known. Just as tiredness had induced him to sleep before the food produced the same effect, and made his longest and more peaceful rest, so that this second time he slept at least 4 hours. Upon waking, instead of the first table he saw another porphyry, in which Bayan Hekara's hands had arranged a collation formed by cakes, nuts and licorice wines. Again it was for him to use everything in such a way that, taking advantage of the kindness that they had with him, everything that his appetite, his taste and demands could be flattered. However, as he did not see anyone to talk to and reveal if that palace was the abode of a man or a god, terror seized his senses, because he was naturally fearful. He took the game to go through all the rooms, in which he covered with blessings to the genius to whom he owed so many favors and respectfully urged him to appear before him. So much eagerness was useless. There were no traces of servants, nothing happened that allowed him to know if that palace was inhabited. Reflecting deeply what he should do, it occurred to him that, for reasons that he could not reach, some superior being gave him that dwelling with all the wealth that filled her. It seemed to him that this thought was an inspiration, and without late, passing again to everything, he took possession of those treasures. Moreover, he mentally ordered the part that destined each of his children, and chose the rooms that could please each of them, congratulating themselves on the joy that would cause them a similar trip. Then he went down to the garden, in which, despite the rigor of winter, he saw, as if he were full spring, the most exotic flowers, which exhaled a lovely perfume. You breathed there a soft and temperate air. Birds of all species, mixing their songs to the confusing noise of the sources, created a lovely harmony. The old man, ecstatic with so many wonders, said for himself, "To my daughters, I think, it will not cost them to get used to this delicious abode. I can't believe they missed the city or preferred to live in it before here. Come on," he said with an unusual outburst of joy, "let's start right now. I feel happy in advance imagining how happy they will feel. Let's not delay that joy." Upon entering that cozy castle he had been careful, despite feeling transitive cold, of Belle laughed by the horse and guiding him to a stable he had seen in the first patio. He carried a path covered by a rose mate in flower. I had never seen such beautiful roses. His fragrance brought him to the memory that he had promised to take one to Beautiful. He cut one and was going to continue to make 6 bouquets, but a terrible noise made him turn his head. His fright was great when he saw with him a horrible animal that, with a furious gesture, supported him on his neck, a kind of tube similar to that of an elephant, and said with a frightful voice, "Who has given you freedom to cut my roses? Wasn't it enough to tolerate you in my palace with such goodness? Far from being grateful, reckless. I see you steal my flowers. Your insolence will not be unpunished." The man, already very horrified with the unexpected presence of that monster, thought he died of fright with this speech and, quickly throwing the fatal rose, said prostrating on the ground, "Ah, Monseigneur, pushed yourself on me. I am not ungrateful. Impressed with your goodness, I did not imagine how little I was able to offend you." The monster, very locked, replied, "Take off, cursed charlatan. I am not interested in your flattery or the titles you grant me. I am not a Monseigneur, I am the beast, and you will not avoid the death you deserve." The merchant, dismayed by such a cruel sentence, and believing that being submissive was the only thing that could save him from death, he said, with really complicated air, that the rose that had dared to start was for one of his daughters, called La Belle. Then, it was because he expected to delay the fatal moment, or raise the compassion of his enemy. He made the chronicle of his misfortunes. He told him the reason for his trip, not forgetting the little gift that he had committed to making the Beautiful, adding that the object to which he had limited his wishes, While the riches of a king had not enough to satisfy those of his other daughters, the occasion was presented. The desire to content it, that he had believed that he could do it without consequences, and that, for the rest, he asked for forgiveness for that involuntary fault. The beast remained a thoughtful moment. Then, retaking the word in a less furious tone, he spoke to him in these terms: "I'm willing to forgive you, but it will only be with the condition that you give me one of your daughters. I need someone to repair this fault." "Good holy! What do you ask me?" the merchant replied. "How could I respect my word? Even if it was inhuman enough to want to save my life at the expense of one of my daughters, what pretext could use it to come here?" "There must be no pretext," the beast interrupted. "I want that daughter of yours that you will drive here comes voluntarily. Otherwise, I don't want to know anything with her. Notice if there is a brave enough and that love you enough to expose yourself in order to save your life. You seem to be a good man. Give me your word that you will return in a month. If you get any to follow you, she will stay in this place and you will return home. If you can't do it, promise me that you will return only after saying goodbye to your children forever, since you will belong to me. Do not believe," the monster continued to creak your teeth, "that you can accept what I propose just to save you. I warn you that, if you think so, I will go looking for you and destroy you along with all your lineage, although 100,000 men showed up to defend you." The good man, although he was totally convinced that it would be useless to test the affection of his daughters, however, accepted what the monster proposed. He promised that he would be back at the established moment, to surrender to his sad destiny without being necessary to go looking for him. After this promise, he thought he was the owner of retiring and saying goodbye to the beast, whose presence could only afflict him. The mercy he had obtained was minimal, but still fearing that the monster revocate her, he expressed the desire he had to leave. The beast replied that he would only leave the next day. "You'll find," he said, "a smart horse as she wakes up. It will take you in a short time. Goodbye, go to dinner and wait for my orders." That poor man, more dead than alive, returned to the living room where he had eaten so well. The dinner, served in front of a great fire, invited him to sit at the table. The exquisiteness and sumptuousness of the delicacies had nothing to keep it. Overwhelmed by his misfortune, if he had not feared that the beast, hidden somewhere, observed it, if he had been sure not to excite his anger with the contempt of his favors, he would not have sat at the table. To avoid a new disaster, he made, for a moment, truce with his pain and, as much as his afflicted heart could afford it, he ate a lot of all the delicacies. At the end of the food, a great noise was heard in the next room, and he did not hesitate to be his sinister host. As it was impossible for him to avoid his presence, he tried to overcome the terror that this sudden noise had just produced. The beast, which appeared at that moment, asked abruptly if it had dinner well. The good man responded, in a modest and fearful tone, that, thanks to his attention, he had eaten a lot. "Promote me," said the monster, "that you will remember the word you just gave me and that you will fulfill her as a man of honor, bringing one of your daughters with you." The old man, who did not have fun in this conversation, swore that he would fulfill what he had promised and that he would be back after a month, alone or with one of his daughters, in case there was one who wanted him enough to follow him despite the conditions he would have to propose. "I warn you once again," said the beast, "be careful not to hide the sacrifice that you must demand from her or the danger you will have to run. Describe my face as it is. That knows what he is going to do. Above all, to be firm in your resolutions. You will no longer have time to reflect when you have brought it here. You don't have to go back. You would be equally lost without her having the possibility of returning home." The merchant, to which such a speech overwhelmed, reiterated the promise of obeying everything that had just been prescribed. The monster, happy with his response, ordered him to go to bed and not get up before the sun was coming out, and a golden bell sounded. "You'll be before leaving," he said too, "and you can cut a rose for beautiful. The horse that will take you will be ready in the patio. I trust that I will see you in a month, however little you are a good man. Goodbye. If you lack probity, I will visit you." The good man, for fear of prolonging a conversation already too painful for him, made a deep reverence to the beast, who also indicated that he did not worry about knowing what the way back, since, at the predetermined moment, The same horse he would ride the next day in the morning would be in front of his door and would be enough for him and his daughter. For a few desire to sleep the old man had, he did not dare to disobey the orders he had received. Forced to go to bed, he only got up when the sun began to shine in his room. He had breakfast quickly and then went down to the garden to cut the rose that the beast had ordered him to take. How many tears made that flower spill! But for the fear of suffering new misfortunes, he contained himself and went without a delay to look for the horse they had promised him, on whose chair he found a warm and light mantle. When riding it, he felt more comfortable than with his. As soon as the horse felt sitting on him, he left with incredible speed. The merchant, who in an instant lost sight of that fatal palace, felt as much joy as pleasure he had felt the day before I see him, with the difference that the relief he experienced when he moved away was poisoned by the cruel need to have to return. "What have I committed to?" he told himself, while the steed took him with a promptness and lightness that only know each other in the country of stories. "Wasn't it better that I was a victim, in the spot, of that thirsty monster of my family's blood? For a promise that I made, as denatured as indiscreet, my life prolonged me. Is it possible that I thought about saving my days at the expense of one of my daughters? Will I be so barbaric to bring it, to see how it is devoured in front of my eyes?" But suddenly, interrupting yourself, he declared, "Oh, unhappy of me! Is that what I should fear more? Even if I could silence the voice of the blood in my heart, would it depend on me to commit such a cowardly act? That daughter of mine has to know her destiny and accept it. I do not seem likely to want to sacrifice for an inhuman father, and I should not make a similar proposition because it is unfair. But assuming that the affection that they all have me induced one of them to sacrifice, are the mere fact of seeing the beast would not end its courage?" And I couldn't complain. "Ah, beast too imperative," he exclaimed. "By the way, you have put an impossible condition to the environment that you offer to avoid your rage and get forgiveness for such a light fault. That is to add the insult to the penalty." But he continued, "I shouldn't think so much. I don't doubt it anymore, and I prefer to expose my fury without turning before trying to use useless help that causes fright to paternal love. Let's take up," he continued, "the path of that funesto palace, and disregarding to pay such a high rescue for the remains of a life that could only be miserable, before the month that was granted to us, let's come back to finish today our unhappy days." These words said, he wanted to back down, but it was impossible to make the horse go back on his steps. Letting himself weigh, he made at least the decision not to propose anything to his daughters. I already saw his house in the distance, and, strengthening himself more and more in his resolution, said, "I will not talk about the danger that threatens me. I will have the pleasure of kissing them once again. I will give you my latest advice. I will beg you to get along with their brothers, to whom I will recommend that they not abandon them." In the midst of these reflections he came home. His horse, who had returned the night before, had worried the family. His sons, dispersed by the forest, had looked for him everywhere, and his daughters, in his impatience for having his news, remained at the door to ask for information to the first to happen. As it was riding in a magnificent horse and was wrapped in a sumptuous mantle, could they have recognized it? At first they took him for a man who came from his part, and the rose that they saw tied to the chair handle finished reassuring them. When that afflicted father found himself closer, they recognized him. They did not think of anything other than to express the satisfaction they felt when they saw him return with good health. But the sadness that transposed his face, and his eyes full of tears that in vain struggled to retain, changed the joy at restlessness. Everyone hastened to ask him the reason for his grief. His only answer was to tell the beautiful, presenting the fatal rose, "Here you have what you asked me. You will pay it expensive, as much as the others." "I imagined it," said the greatest, "and a moment ago she held that she would be the only one you would bring what she asked. Taking into account the station, you will have spent at least what you would have used for us 5 meetings. That rose, as can be seen, will be withered before the end of the day. It doesn't matter, whatever the price was, you wanted to content the happy beautiful." "It's true," the father replied sadly, "that this rose costs me expensive, and more expensive than what would have cost me all the clothes and jewels you wanted. But not in money, and hopefully heaven would have wanted him to buy it with all the fortune that subtracts me. Those words excited their children's curiosity and made the resolution he had taken not revealing his adventure faded. He told them the little success of his trip, the efforts that had demanded to pursue a chimeric fortune, and everything that had happened in the palace of the monster. After these explanations, despair occupied the place of hope and joy. The daughters, seeing all their annihilated projects as for lightning, gave frightful shouts. The most brave brothers said resolutely that they would not tolerate that their father returned to that funesto castillo, that they were brave enough to fight the land of the horrible beast, assuming that it had the recklessness of going to look for him. The good man, despite feeling moved by his affliction, forbade them to make use of violence, telling them that, since he had given his word, he would kill before he was missing. However, they sought some way to save his life. Those young people, full of courage and virtue, proposed that one of them be offered to the anger of the beast. But this had clearly explained that he wanted one of the women and not one of the men. Those brave brothers, counterpart because their good will could not be carried out, they did everything possible to inspire the same feelings to their sisters. But the jealousy they felt for Beautiful were enough to put an insurmountable obstacle to that heroic action. It's not fair, they said, that we perceive horrifically because of a lack of which we are not guilty. It would be to make us victims of Beautiful, which would feel very happy to sacrifice us. But the duty does not demand from us sacrifice size. That is the fruit of moderation and the perpetual moral lessons of this unfortunate. Why didn't he ask, like us, rags and jewelry? If we did not get any of that, at least it cost nothing to ask, and we have no reason to reproach ourselves for having exposed our father's life with foolish orders. If he had not wanted to stand out for an affected disinterest, as he has more luck than we in everything, he would not have lacked money to satisfy it. But it had to be the cause, for a unique whim, of all our misfortunes. It is she who attracts them and wants us to fall on us. We will not be fooled. She has caused them that she finds the remedy. The Bella, to whom the pain had left almost without knowledge, told her sisters, silenced her sobs and sighs, I am the culprit of this misfortune, and only it is up to me to repair it. I recognize that it would be unfair for you to suffer from my fault. However, it is very innocent. How could I anticipate that the desire to have a rose in the middle of the summer should be punished with such plea? The fault is already made, innocent or guilty, it is fair to issue it. You can't blame anyone else. I will expose myself, he continued by saying, to free my father from his fatal commitment. I will meet the beast, very happy to keep his life, with my death, to whom I received it, and to silence you. Do not fear that something can change my mind. But please, during this month, give me the pleasure of not hearing your reproaches anymore. So much firmness in a girl of her age caused all great surprise, and her brothers, who had a lot of love, felt moved with their resolution. For them the Beautiful had infinite attention, and they were aware of the loss they were going to suffer. But it was about saving the life of a father. That pious reason closed their mouths, and completely convinced that it was an irreversible decision, far from thinking about opposing such a generous purpose, they were content to pour some tears and make their sister the praise that deserved her noble resolution, so much more admirable than that, with only 16 years. She had the right to regret the loss of a life that was intended to sacrifice. Cruel. The father was the only one who did not want to accept the decision made by his youngest daughter, but the others reproached him with insolence that he only worried about Beautiful, and that, despite the misfortunes that he had caused, he contrary to him that it was not one of the greatest who paid for his imprudence. Such unfair words forced him to stop insisting. The Beautiful, otherwise, had just assured that, although he did not accept the exchange, she would do it in spite of her, since she would go alone to look for the beast and lose her life without saving it. What do we know? He said, striving to show more peace of mind than he had. Perhaps the frightful luck that is destined for me to hide another as lucky as this seems terrible. His sisters, hearing her speak in this way, they smiled at that chimeric idea, and felt delighted to believe in what for them was a mistake. But the old man, defeated by all his reasons and remembering an ancient prediction for which he had known that this daughter was destined to save her life and to be the cause of the happiness of the whole family, stopped opposing the will of Bella. Little by little they began to talk about their departure as an almost indifferent thing. She was the one who gave the tone of the conversation, and if in the presence of others she seemed to give a happy event, it was only to comfort her father and her brothers and not even alarm them. Although it was angry at the behavior of their sisters, who were impatient to see her leave and to which it seemed that the month passed too slowly, she had the generosity of distributing among them her small furniture and the jewels she had. The sisters received with joy that new proof of generosity without reducing their hatred. An extreme joy filled their hearts when they heard the horse sent to take a sister to which black jealousy did not let them be worthy of love. The father and the brothers, who were the only ones to feel afflicted, could not resist that fatal moment and wanted to slaughter the horse. But Beautiful, keeping all their tranquility, made them see at that time how ridiculous that purpose was and the impossibility of carrying it out. After saying goodbye to his brothers, he kissed his insensitive sisters, saying goodbye so moving that he made some tears sprout and that, for a few minutes, they believed almost as afflicted as his brothers. While they manifested those short and late regrets, the good man, urged by his daughter, mounted on horseback, and the Bella did the same with the same rush that would have shown for an extremely pleasant trip. The animals seemed to fly more than walk. That extreme speed did not bother her. The gallop of that singular horse was so soft that the only agitation that the Beautiful felt was the one that came from the breath of the Zephyros. It was in vain that, while they were on their way, his father offered him 100 times to lower her and go alone to meet the beast. "Piensa, dear daughter of mine," he said, "that we are still on time. That monster is more frightening than you can imagine. However firm your resolution is, I fear that it looks like its appearance. Then it will be too late. You will be lost, and we will both perish." "If I met that terrible beast," the Beautiful replied Prudence, hoping to be happy, "it would not be impossible for that hope to abandon me to see her. But as I give my imminent death, and I believe it sure, what do I care that who should give it to me is pleasant or repulsive?" While they talked in this way, the night came and not for that reason the horse stopped running in the dark. For the most surprising of the wonders, it dissipated suddenly. Artifice fires of all kinds, mortars, mills, wheels and all the most beautiful that ingenuity can invent dazzle our two travelers. That pleasant and unforeseen light that illuminated the entire forest spread in the air a soft lukewarm that began to become necessary, because the cold, in that country, feels more penetrating at night than during the day. Thanks to that lovely clarity, father and daughter realized that they were in the Alameda de los Naranjos. As soon as they got there, artifice fires ceased. Its light was replaced by all the statues, which they had in their hands on. In addition, innumerable lanterns covered the entire palace facade. Symmetrically arranged, they formed crown tapes and figures in which doubles LL and double B beasts were seen. When they entered the patio, they were greeted by an artillery save that, added to the sound of 1,000 different instruments, both sweet and warriors, created a lovely harmony. "The beast," said the Beautiful mocking tone, "must be very hungry to celebrate the arrival of her prey." However, despite the emotion caused by the imminence of an event that, according to any appearance, was going to be fatal, by paying attention to so many magnificences, that they happened to each other and offered him the most beautiful show that he had ever seen, he could not stop telling his father that the preparations for his death were brighter than the nuptial pomp of the largest king of the earth. The horse went to stop at the foot of the entrance staircase. The beauty went down and her father, as soon as she set foot on the ground, led her for a lobby to the room where she had received so many entertainment. There they found a great fire, burning candles that spread an exquisite perfume and, in addition, a splendidly served table. The good man, aware of the way the beast fed his guests, told his daughter that this meal was destined for them and that the right thing was that they served her. Beauty did not oppose any repair, completely convinced that it would not be that would advance her death. He imagined, on the contrary, that it would be a way to let the monster know the little disgust he had to meet him. He excited himself thinking that his openness would be able to placate him, and even that his adventure could be less sad than he had feared at the beginning. That frightful beast with which they had threatened her was not seen. In the palace everything transposed joy and magnificence. It gave the impression that it was his arrival that had made them sprout, and it was not plausible that they were the preparations of funeral pomp. His hopes lasted very little. The monster was heard. A horrendous noise caused by the huge weight of his body, by the terrible tinting of his scales and by heinous howls, announced his arrival. The terror seized the beautiful. The old man, hugging his daughter, launched lancinant screams. But she, who in an instant recovered the dominance of herself, contained her agitation. Seeing the beast, which he could not face without an intimate shudder, advanced with a firm and modest air, greeted her with the greatest respect. That way of acting like the monster. After examining it in a way that, without seemingly glued, he could inspire terror to the boldest, he told the old man, "Good night, good man." And turning to Beautiful, he also said, "Good evening, Beautiful." The old man, who was still fearing that his daughter would happen something sinister, had no strength to respond. But the Beautiful, without flinching, and in a sweet and firm voice said, "Good night, beast." "Do you come here voluntarily?" the beast continued, "and aware of letting your father leave without following him?" The beauty replied that these were all its intentions. "And what do you think will happen to you when you're gone?" "What pleases you," she said. "My life is at your disposal and I will blindly submit to what you want to do with me." "Your docility pleases me," the beast replied, "and since it is so, and they have not brought you by force, you will stay with me. As for you, good man," he said to the merchant, "you'll go tomorrow at dawn. The bell will notify you, do not take you after breakfast, the same horse will take you home. But," he added, "when you are in the middle of your family, that you do not think of seeing my palace again, and remember that the entrance is prohibited forever. You, Bella," the monster continued addressing the young woman, "leads your father to the wardrobe that is here next to him. Choose everything that both believe they can please your brothers and sisters. You will find 2 trunks, take them. It is fair that you send them some value to make them remember." In spite of the liberality of the monster, the imminent departure of the father deeply moved Beautiful and caused an extreme penalty. However, he prepared to obey the beast, who left them after telling them, as he had done when he entered, "Good night, Beautiful." "Good night, good man." When they were alone, the good man kissed his daughter and kept crying. The idea that he was going to leave her with the monster was for him the cruelest of supplications. He regretted having led her to that place. The doors were open and he would have wanted to take her with him, but the Beautiful made him known the danger and possible consequences of that decision. They entered the wardrobe that had been indicated. They were surprised to see the riches they found there. He was full of costumes so superb that a queen could not have wished anything more beautiful, or better. There was never a better store provided. When the Bella had chosen the attire that seemed more appropriate, it did not agree with the current condition of her family but in proportion to the wealth and liberality of the beast, which made those gifts, opened a closet whose door was of rock glass framed in gold. Although, after having seen such magnificent exterior, I should have hoped to find a rare and beautiful treasure, the pile of gems of all kinds that he saw was such a splendor that he was barely bearable for his eyes. The Beautiful, by spirit of submission, gathered without regard a prodigious amount, which distributed the best that could among the different packages he had made. When opening the last closet, which was nothing more than a cabinet full of gold coins, he changed his mind. "You will give your children what you please. That way you will not be forced to share your secret with anyone, and your wealth will belong to you without danger. The gain that you would get out of the precious stones, although the price is much higher, could never be so easy to obtain. To get it, you would be obliged to sell them and entrust them to people who would only look at you with envy. Perhaps your own confidence would be fatal. Instead," he continued, "the gold currencies will be covered by any unpleasant event, giving you ease of acquiring land and houses and buying fine furniture, jewelry and precious stones." The father approved his idea. But, as he wanted to take to his daughter's costumes and jewelry, in order to make the gold he wanted to put out of the trunks what he had chosen for his own use. The large number of currencies that he put in them could not fill them. They were made of folds that were opening as they were filled. He found room for the jewels he had taken, and the trunks ended up containing more than he wanted. "All these coins," he said to his daughter, "will allow me to sell the precious stones little by little. Following your advice, I will hide my wealth to everyone, even my children. If they knew how rich I am going to be, they would torment me to abandon country life, which is, however, it is the only one in which I have obtained a liking, and in which I have not suffered the perfidy of the false friends that the world is full. But the trunks were so heavy that an elephant had succumbed under the load, and the hope with which he had just excited seemed like a dream and nothing more than that. The beast has made fun of us, he said. He has simulated to give me goods and at the same time puts me in the impossibility of taking them. You don't judge her, the beautiful replied. You didn't cause her liberality with any indiscreet request, or with any avid or interested consideration. Such a joke would lack grace. I think, since the monster has been attentive to you, that you will find a way you can enjoy these goods. All we have to do is close the trunks and leave them here. He surely knows why transportation means. It was impossible to think more prudently. The good man, folding to this point of view, returned to the living room with his daughter. Sitting one and the other on a sofa, they saw breakfast served in an instant. The father ate more desire than the previous night. What had just happened decreased his despair and made his trust reborn. It would have gone without sadness if the beast had not had the cruelty to tell him to forget to see his palace again, and that he had to say goodbye forever from his daughter. The only evil without remedy we know is death. The good man did not feel completely dejected by that sentence. He was excited about the idea that he was not irrevocable, and this hope made him separate quite satisfied with his host. The beautiful was not so happy. Uncreated that a happy future was reserved for him, he feared that the rich peasant with whom the monster filled his family were the price of his life, and that he devoured her as soon as she was alone with her. The youngest of the evils he feared was to be destined to suffer eternal prison, and that his only company was a horrendous beast. This reflection left her deeply self-absorbed, but a second touch of Belle told them that it was time to separate. They went down to the patio, where the father found 2 horses, one loaded with the 2 trunks and the other only destined for him. This last horse, covered with a good mantle and with 2 bags of food hanging on each side of the chair, was the same as the old man had already ridden. So great attentions from the beast were going to give pabulum again to the conversation, but the horses, whittling and scratching the ground with their legs, implied that it was time to separate. The merchant, for fear of irritating the beast with his delay, said goodbye forever from his daughter. The 2 horses left faster than the wind, and the beautiful lost sight of them in an instant. He rose again in tears to the room that would be his and in which, for a few moments, he was plunged into the saddest reflections. However, the dream beat her, and wanted to look for a break that had lost for more than a month. As he had nothing better to do, he was about to go to bed when he saw a cup of chocolate already prepared on his nightstand. He drank her asleep and, as the eyes closed almost immediately, she sank into a quiet dream that she had not known again from the moment she had received the fatal rose. While sleeping, he dreamed that he was on the verge of a channel that extended until he lost sight of, flanked by 2 rows of orange and flourished from a prodigious height, where, seized by the thought of her sad situation, she deplored the misfortune that condemned her to spend her days in that place, without hope of being able to get out of him. A young man, beautiful how they paint love, told him with a voice that reached the heart, "You believe, beautiful, that you are as unfortunate as you seem. It is in this place where you must receive the reward that has been so unfairly denied everywhere. Use your sagacity to discover me under the appearances that cover me. I judge, seeing me, if my company is despicable, and if it should not be preferred to that of an unworthy family of you. Say what you want, and all your wishes will be fulfilled. I love you endearing. You are the only one you can make me happy making yourself happy. You never change. Being for the qualities of your soul as superior to other women as you are for your beauty, we will be completely happy." Then, that lovely ghost appeared at his feet, joining the most charming promises. He was urged, in the most passionate terms, to consent to make him happy, and assured him that it was something that was perfectly in his power. "What can I do?" she said solicitous. "Just the impulses of your gratitude," he replied. "Don't consult your eyes and, above all, don't abandon me and get me out of the atrocious penalty I suffer." After this first dream, he thought he was in a magnificent room, with a lady whose majestic air and surprising beauty made a deep respect in their hearts. That lady told him in a caressing voice, "Belle, find her, not just anything you just left. A more illustrious destination awaits you, but if you want to deserve it, be careful not to be fooled by appearances. His dream lasted more than 5 hours, during which he saw the young man in 100 different places and in 100 different ways. Sometimes he offered him a gallant party, sometimes he made the most tender oaths. How pleasant was your dream! He would have liked to prolong him, but his eyes opened to light could not close again, and the beautiful one believed that everything that had happened to her was nothing more than the pleasure of a dream. A clock gave the 12, repeating her name with music, and forced her to get up. The first thing he saw was a dressing table provided with everything that women may need. After decorating with a kind of pleasure, whose cause could not guess, passed to the living room, where they had just served lunch. When you eat alone, a meal ends soon. Back in his room, he threw himself on a sofa. There, the young man with whom he had dreamed again presented himself to the mind. "I can make you happy," she told me. "Apparently, the horrible beast, which seems to send here, keeps it in prison. How to do it to get it out of it?" They repeated that I do not trust appearances. I don't understand anything, but how crazy I am. I entertained myself looking for reasons to explain an illusion that formed the dream and that the awakening destroyed. I don't have to pay attention. I have to deal with only my present situation and look for entertainments that prevent me from succumbing to boredom. A little later, he began to travel the numerous rooms of the palace. She was amazed, since she had never seen anything so beautiful. The first one in which he entered was a great mirrors. He looked at them from everywhere. The first thing that caught his attention was a bracelet that hung from a candlestick. He found in her the portrait of the handsome knight, as he had believed to see him while he slept. How could I have not been able to recognize it? He already had his features too deeply recorded in the mind and perhaps in the heart. With sudden joy put the bracelet, without thinking if it was correct to do so. When moving from that room to a gallery full of paintings, he found the same portrait in natural size, that it seemed to look at it with such an affectionate attention that he blushed, as if that painting was what he represented or witnesses who saw his thoughts. Continuing with his walk, he found a room full of different instruments. As almost everyone knew how to touch them, he tried several, preferring the carnation to others, because he was better with his voice. From that room passed to another gallery different from that of the paintings. It contained an immense library. He liked to go, and since he lived in the field he had been deprived of that pleasure. His father, due to his business disorder, had been forced to sell his books. There, the great taste she had for reading could easily find satisfaction and preserve it from tedium and loneliness. The day passed without everything could see it. As the night approached, all the rooms were illuminated with scented candles placed in transparent spiders or of different colors, and not glass but of diamonds and rubies. At the time, the beautiful found its dinner served with the same refinement and the same correction. No human figure appeared before her. Her father had prevented her from being alone. That loneliness was already beginning not to bother her when her ear revealed that the beast approached. As it had not yet been alone with her, and since I ignored what the encounter would be like and even feared that the monster arrived to devour it, could it have not trembled? But when the beast arrived, whose appearance had nothing furious, his fears dissipated. The monstrous giant told him tacitly, "Good night, beautiful." She returned the greeting in the same terms, with a sweet but little trembling. Among the different questions he asked him, the monster wanted to know what he had entertained. The beautiful replied, "I passed the day visiting your palace, but it is so vast that I did not have time to see all the rooms and beauties they contain." The beast asked, "Do you think you can live up here?" The young woman replied politely that she would not be sad to live in such a beautiful place. After an hour of conversation on the same subject, the beautiful managed to distinguish easily, through the frightful voice, that the tone was determined by the physical constitution of the beast, and that it was not so much the fury and lack of intelligence that characterized it. Without surroundings, the beast asked the young woman if she would let her sleep with her. Faced with this unforeseen question, the fears of beauty were renewed, and giving a terrible cry, he could not help say, "Oh my God, I am lost." "In no way," the beast replied quietly, "but without frightening, I answer me properly, tell me clearly, tell me or no." The beauty replied trembling, "No, beast." "Well, since you don't want to," said the monster, docile, "I'm leaving." "Good night, beautiful." "Good night, beast," the frightened young man said with great relief. Content of not having to fear any violence, he lay down quietly and fell asleep. His beloved unknown appeared to his mind. He seemed to tell him affectionately, "What joy will see you again, dear Bella, but what a shame causes me your rigor. I realize that I will have to be miserable for a long time." The ideas of the beautiful changed the object. It seemed that the young man presented him a crown, and the dream was made to see it in 1,000 different ways. Sometimes it seemed to him that he was kneeling in front of her, either abandoning the most extreme joy, either by shedding a torrent of tears that moved her to the deepest of the soul. This mixture of joy and sadness lasted all night. Upon waking, with the imagination occupied by such a sweet object, he sought his portrait to see him again and be sure that he had not been wrong. He ran to the paint gallery, where he recognized him better than the first time. How long was admiring it! But as embarrassed with his weakness, he was content to look at the one on his arm. Meanwhile, to end those tender reflections, he went down to the gardens. The good weather invited her to walk and her eyes were delighted. They had never seen anything so beautiful in nature. The forests were adorned with admirable statues and sources without number, which refreshed the air with water jets so high that they almost lost sight of them. What surprised her most was to recognize the places where, during the dream, he had imagined seeing the stranger. Above all, when he saw the big channel bordered by orange and myrtles, he did not know what to think about that dream, which no longer seemed like a fiction. He thought he found the explanation by imagining that the beast had someone prisoner in his palace. He decided that that same night he would leave doubts by asking him to the monster, whose visit he hoped to receive at the customary time. As much as his forces allowed it, he walked the rest of the day, without even contemplating everything. The rooms that had not been able to see on the eve were no less worthy of their eyes than the others. In addition to the instruments and curiosities that surrounded her everywhere, she found in another room something to entertain. It was full of bags and knitting launches, of scissors to cut, of racks prepared for all types of embroidery. In short, there was everything. A door of that lovely room allowed him to see a superb gallery, from which the most beautiful landscape in the world was divided. They had taken care of placing a great bird full of exotic birds in that gallery, which, upon Bella, did an admirable concert. They were also postponed on the shoulders, and all those affectionate birds rivaled each other for approaching him. Besting prisoners, she told them, "I find them charming and I get it so far from my room, I would often have the pleasure of listening to them." What was no surprise when, while saying these words, he opened a door and found himself in his own room, who believed away from that beautiful gallery he had reached around and through a succession of stays that made up that pavilion. The door that opened had prevented him from realizing the closeness of the birds, and was very practical to isolate himself from the noise when one did not feel like hearing them. The beautiful one, continuing her walk, saw another feathered flock. They were parrots of all kinds and color. Everyone, seeing her, began to chatter. One gave him good morning, another asked him to eat, another, more gallant, begged him to kiss him. Several of them sang arias of opera, others declared verses composed of the best authors, and all offered to have fun. They were as affable and affectionate as the occupants of the bird. His presence gave him a real taste. He felt happy to find who to talk to, since silence did not make her happy. He interrogated several of them, who answered him as very intelligent animals. He chose one who liked more than the others. The others, jealous of that preference, lamented painfully, and she calmed them with some pampering and giving them permission to see her when they wanted. Not far from that place saw a large group of monkeys of all size, large boys, capuchin monkeys, monkeys with a human face, others with blue, green, black or color beard. They met him at the entrance of the stay they occupied, where chance had led it. They made reverences accompanied by innumerable cabrioles, and they expressed with their gestures how sensitive they were to the honor. To celebrate, they danced on a rope. They made somersaults with unique skill and lightness. The Bella was very satisfied with the monkeys, but she was not happy not to find anything that gave her news of the handsome unknown. Losing the hopes of having them and thinking that their dream had been a chimera, it did everything possible to forget it, but their efforts were openings. He stroked the monkeys and, while doing so, said he would like some to follow her to accompany her. Immediately, 2 great monkeys dressed in cutting suit, which seemed to be aware of their orders, were severely placed by their side. 2 awake monkeys took the tail of his dress and served as pages. A funny Gibraltar monkey, dressed as a squire man, gave him the right-handed leg. Accompanied by that unique courtship, the beautiful one went to eat. While lunch lasted, the birds whistled as instruments and accompanied the voice of the parrots, which sang the most beautiful and fashionable melodies. During that concert, the monkeys, who had arrived at the right to serve the beautiful, establishing in an instant their respective ranges and positions, came into functions and served it ceremoniously, with the skill and respect with which the queens are served by their officers. When she got up from the table, another group wanted to entertain her with a new show. They were a kind of actors who interpreted a tragedy in the most exceptional way. Those monkeys and those cute ladies with theater clothes, covered with embroidery, pearls and diamonds, made gestures in accordance with the words of their papers, that the parrots pronounced in a very clear and close way, so that they had to be sure that those birds were hidden under the wig of some and the mantle of others to realize that those actors of a new genre did not speak for themselves. The work seemed expressly done for those actors, and the beautiful felt delighted. At the end of the tragedy, one of them went to make a very beautiful fulfillment, and thanked him for the patience with which he had heard them. Only the monkeys that constituted their domestic service were left with her, and were destined to have fun. After dinner, the beast was as usual to visit, and after the same questions and the same answers, the conversation ended with a good night, beautiful. The monas who officiated of palace hostesses diverted their lady, put her in bed, and had the kindness of opening the cage window, so that the birds, with a less strident song than the one they had during the day, provoked the dream and, numbing the senses, procured the pleasure of seeing their lovely in love again. Several days passed without getting bored. Every moment was marked by new pleasures. The monkeys, in 3 or 4 lessons, gave themselves to domesticate each one a parrot that, serving as an interpreter, responded to beautiful as quickly and precision as the monkeys put in their gestures. Anyway, the only thing that beautiful was painful was to have to endure the presence of the beast. But her visits were short, and thanks to her, without a doubt, she enjoyed all imaginable pleasures. The meekness of that monster inspired beauty, sometimes, the purpose of asking if she knew something about the young man she saw in dreams. But quite aware that the beast was in love with her, she feared awakening her jealousy with that question, so that she fell out of prudence, and did not dare to satisfy her curiosity. On several occasions the Bella had visited all the rooms of that enchanted palace, but we gladly see the unusual, curious and magnificent things. Her steps took her to a large room she had only seen once. That room had 4 windows on each of its sides. Only 2 were open and let very little light pass. The Bella wanted to give her more clarity, but instead of the light she thought she entered only she found an opening that gave a closed place. That place, although spacious, seemed dark, and his eyes could not perceive more than a faint distant glow that only seemed to reach it through a black and extremely thick gauze. While thinking about that place, an intense light dazzled her suddenly. The fabric rose and the beautiful discovered a theater of the best enlightened. In the stands and in the boxes, he saw people of one sex of the most proportionate and beautiful. Immediately, a gentle symphony, which began to be heard, only ended to allow actors very different from monkeys and parrots to represent a beautiful tragedy, followed by a workshop that, in its kind, matched the first. Bella liked shows. It was the only pleasure she had missed after leaving the city. The curiosity he had to know what fabric was the carpet of the palos adjacent to his was made by a glass that separated them, which made him know that he had believed real, was nothing more than an artifice that, through that glass, reflected the objects and sent them to her from the top of the most beautiful city theater in the world. Obtaining a reverberation from so far is the masterpiece of optics. After the representation, La Bella remained a little longer in her box to see the elegant public leave. The darkness that filled that place forced her to direct her reflections in another sense. Happy with that discovery, which was promised to make frequent use, he went down to the gardens. The wonders began to become relatives. He realized with pleasure that they only happened for their good and to please him. After dinner, the beast, as usual, went to ask him what he had done during the day. The beauty realized exactly all her amusements and told her that she had been in the theater. "Do you like it?" asked the rough animal. "You want everything you want, and you will have it. You are very pretty." The beautiful smiled to enter that rude way of making her fulfilled. But what did not make her laugh was the usual question. "And do you want me to go to me with you?" Caesar his good humor. He was free just by responding no. However, the docility of the monster in that last encounter did not reassure her. "What will all this end?" he told herself. "The question that makes me every time, if I want to bed with him, he proves that he persists in his love. His benefits confirm it to me. But although it is not stubborn in your orders, and although it does not manifest any resentment for my negatives, who assures me that it will not lose patience, and that I will not end up paying it with death?" These reflections left her so thoughtful that she had almost dawned when she went to bed. His stranger, who only expected that moment to appear, made him tender reproaches for his delay. He found her sad, thoughtful, and asked what he could displease him in that place. She replied that the only thing that displeased her was the monster, which she saw every night. He would have ended up getting used, but he was in love with her, and that love made him fear possible violence. "Because of the fools you make to me, I think I want me to marry him. Would you advise me?" the beauty told her stranger. "Tell her yes? Unfortunately, even if it was as charming as it is horrible now, you have made my heart inaccessible to him as well as for any other, and I am not ashamed to confess that I can only love you." Such a charming confession did not stop flattering the young man, but he only replied saying, "He loves you, don't be fooled by appearances and get me from this prison." Those words continuously repeated, without any other explanation, caused the beautiful and infinite penalty. "How do you want me to do it?" she said. "I would want to achieve your freedom at all costs. But this good will find it useless as long as I do not give the means to put it into practice." The stranger responded, but in such a confusing way she didn't understand anything. 1,000 extravagant things happened to him in front of his eyes. I saw the monster, on a dazzling throne of precious stones, which called her and invited her to sit next to her. A moment later, the stranger made him get out of there precipitously and occupied his place. The beast recovered the advantage and, in turn, the stranger disappeared. They spoke to him through a black veil that changed his voice and made it horrendous. All the time of his dream passed in that way, and despite the agitation that caused him, it seemed, however, that he ended too soon, since the awakening deprived her of the object of her love. Once neat and dressed, different tasks, books and animals entertained it until the moment of theatrical representation. It was time for it to be there. But it was not in the same theater but in the opera, which began as soon as she took her place. The show was magnificent, and the spectators were no less. The mirrors showed him clearly to the youngest of the stalls. Nice to see human faces, many of whom knew personally. It would have been a great pleasure for her to be able to speak to them and make them hear. He was more satisfied with that day than with the precedent, and the rest looked like what had happened since he was in that palace. The beast arrived at night. After his visit, he retired as usual. The night was similar to the others. I want to say that it was full of pleasant dreams. Upon waking, he found the same amount of domestic to serve it. After lunch, his occupations were different. The previous day, when opening another window, he had found himself in the opera. To vary his entertainments, he opened a third that sought the pleasures of the Saint-Germain fair, much brighter at that time than is today. But since it was not yet the time when people came in good tone, they had time to see and examine everything. There he saw the most rare curiosities, the extraordinary productions of nature, engineering works. The most insignificant things happened in front of their eyes. The same puppets, waiting for something better, were not an unworthy distraction of it. The comic opera was in its splendor. Beauty was very happy with all that. At the exit of that show, he saw all the selected people who walked through the stores of the merchants. Among them he recognized professional players, who went to that place as their workplace. He repaired in some who, losing their money for the ability of those who played, left there with less cheerful counters than they had when they entered. The prudent players, who do not expose their random fortune from the game, and who play to take advantage of their talent, could not hide their traps to Belle. I would have wanted to warn their victims the evil they were doing, but, more than 1,000 leagues of them, such a thing was not in their possession. He heard and saw everything in a very clear way, without being possible to hear their voice, nor get them to see her. The reflexes that carried what he saw and heard were not perfect enough to make the reverse path. It was located above the air and the wind. Everything came to it by thought. He reflected in all these things, and that prevented him from making useless attempts. He had already spent midnight when he thought it was time to retire. The need to eat could have revealed how late he was, but he had found in his box liquors and baskets full with everything necessary for a collation. His dinner was light and short. He hurried to bed. The beast perceived his impatience, and was simply to wish her good night, to leave her time to sleep and the unknown freedom to reappear. The following days were similar. He had an inexhaustible source of new entertainments in its windows. The other three procured, one, the pleasure of Italian comedy, another, the view to the tablias, where all the most distinguished and graceful people of both sexes in Europe meet. The last window was not the least pleasant. It gave him a safe way to find out everything that was done in the world. The scenes were entertaining and varied of all possible ways. Sometimes what I saw was a famous embassy, an illustrious wedding, or some interesting revolutions. He was in front of this window at the time of the last revolt of the Janissaries, and witnessed her until the end. At any time I was there, I was sure to find a pleasant occupation. The disgust that had felt the first days when he heard the beast had dissipated completely. His eyes had become accustomed to his ugliness. He had become accustomed to his silly questions, and, if the conversation had been longer, perhaps he would have seen it more pleasure. But 4 or 5 phrases always equal, said rudely, and that they only asked for a yes or no, they were not their taste. As everything seemed to be able to satisfy the wishes of Belle in advance, it was more careful to groom, even if it was sure that no one could see it. But that care was due to herself, and it was a pleasure for her to put on the different costumes of all the nations of the earth, the more easily how much her closet gave her everything she could desire, and every day she presented something new. Dressed in his different galas, his mirror made him know that he could have pleased all nations, and his animals, each according to his talent, repeated him incessantly, the monkeys with their gestures, the parrots with their words, and the birds with their song. Such a delicious life should have filled his wishes. But everything tired. The greatest happiness becomes insults when it is continuous, when it always comes from the same things and one is exempt from fear and hope. The beautiful suffered in her own flesh. The memory of her family went to disturb her in the midst of her prosperity. His happiness could not be perfect as long as he did not have the sweet satisfaction of making her meet her family. As his deal with the beast had become more familiar, he was already, because of the habit of seeing her or for the meekness that was in character, he thought he could ask something. But that freedom was only taken after making the beast promised him that he would not get furious. The question he asked him was if they were two alone in the castle. Yes, I swear, the monster told him with some vehemence, and I assure you that you and me, the monkeys and other animals, are the only beings that breathe in this place. The beast said nothing more and came out more abrupt than usual. The beautiful had asked that question just to try to find out if her lover was not in that palace. I would have wanted to see him and talk with him. That was a joy that would have agreed to pay with their freedom, and even with all the pleasures that surrounded it. If that lovely young man has no more than in her imagination, she would consider that palace a prison that would end up being her grave. These sad ideas also tormented her at night. He dreamed that he was afflicted, on the edge of a large channel, when his beloved stranger, very alarmed by his sad state, said, teaching his hands among his, "What is, my dear beautiful, what dislikes you and alters your tranquility? On behalf of the love I feel for you, say you explain it to me, nothing will be denied. You are here the only sovereign, everything is subject to your orders. Where does the sorrow that overwhelms you come from? Is it to have to do with the beast what you grieve? You have to be free of it." He said these words, and beautiful seemed to him that the stranger took a dagger and was about to slaughter the monster, that he did not make any effort to defend himself, that he even exposed the blows with a submission and a docility that made him fear the sleeping beauty that, although he had risen to go in relief of the beast, the unknown reached his goal before her. As soon as he realized the intention of the stranger, and to anticipate the effects of his protection, he exclaimed with all his strength, "Detence, barbarian, you don't shed my benefactor, or let me kill me." The young man, who stubbornly stabbed the beast despite the shouts of Bella, told her, angry, "Do not love me, then, since you take sides for this monster that opposes my happiness?" "You are an ungrateful," she replied as she kept retaining it. "I love you more than my own life, and I would prefer to lose it before you stop loving you. You are everything to me, and I am not so unfair as to compare you with any of the assets of this world. I would renounce them without sorrow to follow the most inhospitable deserts. But those tender feelings cannot be put over my gratitude. I owe everything to the beast, she anticipates my wishes, it is she who sought me to meet you, and I undergo death rather than suffer that you do the slightest outrage." After such fighting, the objects disappeared and the beautiful one believed to see the lady that she had already seen in previous nights, and that she said, "Bella, beautiful, be the model of generous women. Know that you are as prudent as lovely, do not hesitate to sacrifice your inclination on behalf of your duty. You take the real path of happiness. You will be happy, as long as you don't trust deceptive appearances." When Bella woke up, she reflected in that dream that began to seem mysterious. But it was still an enigma for her. The desire to see his father again was stronger during the day than the concerns that, while sleeping, caused him the monster and the stranger. In such a way that, either calm overnight, nor happy during the day, despite being in the midst of the greatest opulence, to calm his regrets he only had the pleasure of the shows. He went to the Italian comedy of which, from the first scene, he went out to go to the opera, but also left there with the same promptness. His regret followed her everywhere. It often opened more than 6 times each of the 6 windows, without finding in them a moment of tranquility. The nights that passed were similar to the days, always full of agitation, and sadness began to deeply affect their charms and health. She was very careful to hide the pain that overwhelmed her, and the monster, who had surprised her several times with her eyes full of tears, accepted her explanation that her head hurt a little and did not ask anything else. But one night, her sobs betrayed her and, without being able to hide, she told the beast that she wanted to know the reason for her grief, that she wanted to see her family again. Upon hearing these words, the beast dropped, without strength to sustain himself, and giving a great sigh, or rather a scream capable of dying of fear, he replied, "How beautiful! You want to abandon an unfortunate beast? Should I have imagined that you would be so ungrateful? What are you missing to be happy? The attention I have for you, wouldn't they have to protect me from your hatred? How unfair you are! You prefer your father's house and the envy of your sisters. You like to monitor herds than enjoy the pleasures of life here. It is not for love towards your family, it is because of my antipathy that you want to get away." "No, beast," the beautiful one replied with shy and flattering, "I don't hate you, and I would dislike losing the hope of seeing you again. But I can't overcome the desire I have to hug my family. Let me absent for 2 months, and I promise you that I will return with joy to spend the rest of my life by your side and that I will never ask you any other permission." During this speech, the beast, lying on the ground and with his head thrown back, just showed that he was still breathing for his painful sighs. He replied to Beautiful in these terms, "I can't deny you anything, but maybe this costs me life. It doesn't matter. In the room adjacent to yours you will find 4 boxes. Fill them with everything you like, either for you or your family. If you miss your word, you will regret and dislike, when it is too late, the death of your poor beast. Return after 2 months and you will find me alive. For your return you will not need horses or carriage. Just say goodbye to your family at night, before retiring, and when you are in bed, turn your ring and say firmly, 'I want to return to my palace to see my beast.' Good night, and don't worry about anything, sleep quietly, you'll see your father early tomorrow. Goodbye, Bella." As soon as he saw himself, he hastened to fill the boxes with all the imaginable primers and wealth. The boxes were only full when they got tired of putting things in them. After all those preparations, he went to bed. The hope of seeing his family again from one moment to his family was awake all the time he should have slept, and the dream only defeated her at the time he would have to have risen. While he slept he saw his lovely unknown, but he was no longer the same. Lying on the grass, he seemed to suffer the most intense of the pain. The beautiful, moved to see him in that state, was excited to get him out of that deep melancholy, asking him the cause of his penalty. But his crush, looking at her with eyes full of languor, said, "How can you, inhuman, ask me that question? Do you ignore it, being that you leave and that this game is my death sentence?" "You don't leave pain, dear unknown," she replied. "My absence will be brief. I just want my family to stop believing that I have had a sad end, and very soon I will return to this palace. I will not leave you again. And how could I leave a abode that I like so much? In addition, I have given the beast my word that I will return, and I cannot miss it. But why does this trip have to separate? Be my guide. I will postpone my trip until tomorrow to ask the beast. I am sure that it will not deny it. Accept my proposition, so we will not have to separate and return together here. My family will be delighted to see you, and I trust that you will have for you all the consideration you deserve." "I can't give in to your wishes," the lover replied, "unless you are determined to never come back here. It is the only means of getting out. Think what you want to do. The power of the inhabitants of this place is not great enough to force you to return. The only thing that can happen to you is by appealing to the beast." "You can't imagine it," replied the beautiful with vivacity. "She told me that it would die if I was missing my word." "What do you care about?" the lover replied. "Will it be a misfortune that to achieve your satisfaction is enough to sacrifice the life of a monster? What is the use of the world? Who would lose with the destruction of a being that is not on earth except to cause horror to the entire nature?" "Ah!" exclaimed the almost furious beauty, "you have to know that I would give my life to keep her, and that this monster, which is only because of her appearance, has so much humanity that she should not be punished for a deformity to which she does not contribute to anything. I cannot pay their benefits with such a perverse ingratitude." The stranger interrupted her to ask what she would do if the monster tried to kill him, and, in case one of the two had to perish the other, which of them would give help. "I love you in an exclusive way," she replied. "But although my love is extreme, I could not reduce my thanks for the beast, and if I saw myself in that dire situation, I would be careful of pain that the consequences of that dilemma could cause me to kill myself. But why do such unpleasant assumptions? Although they are nothing more than a fantasy, my idea hurts my blood. Let's change the subject." And he gave the example, telling him the most flattering words that a tender in love can tell his crush. She did not feel retained by the haughty decorum, and, as the dream gave her freedom to act naturally, she revealed feelings that, if she had used all her reason, she would have disguised. He slept a long time, and, when he woke up, he felt fear that the beast would miss his word. He was mired in that uncertainty when he heard the sound of a human voice that was familiar. He rushed the curtains and was surprised to be seen in a room he did not know, and whose furniture was not as luxurious as those of the beast's palace. That prodigy caused him to rush and open the door of the room. "I didn't recognize anything from that room." What missed him most was to find there the 4 boxes he had prepared on the eve. The transfer of his person and his treasures was a proof of the power and goodness of the beast. But where was he? He still did not know when, finally hearing his father's voice, he went to throw his arms around his neck. His presence surprised his brothers and his sisters. They looked at her as if they arrived from another world. They all hugged her, giving the greatest samples of joy, but her sisters, in the deep heart, suffered when she saw her again. His jealousy had not extinguished. After many reciprocal kindness, the good man wanted to see her alone, to know for her the circumstances of such a surprising trip and put it up to date with the state of her fortune, in which she had had such great influence. He told her that the day he had left her in the beast's palace, he had been returned home that same night without the slightest fatigue, that, on the way, he had reflected in the way of hiding the trunks of his children, wishing them to be deposited in a small cabinet adjacent to his room and whose key was alone, that he had thought that desire was impossible to perform, but that, when he set his foot on the ground, like the horse that had loaded the trunks he fled, he was suddenly free of the difficulty of hiding his treasures. "I confess," said his daughter's old man, "that those riches that I thought were private did not cause me any pity. I had not possessed them for so long, and to regret them a lot. But it seemed to me that this adventure was a cruel prognosis of your destiny." He had no doubt that the perfidious beast would act in the same way with you. "I feared that the favors made you object as little as those that I had granted me. That idea caused me concern. To hide it, I pretended to need rest. It was only to be able to give myself without break to pain. But my affliction did not last. Seeing my trunks, who had believed lost, I considered them a good omen of your happiness. I found them placed in my little cabinet, in the place where I wanted to have them. The keys, which I had forgotten at the table in the living room where we had spent the night, were put in the locks. That circumstance, which gave me a new proof of the goodness of the beast, always attentive, filled me with joy. It was then that, without a doubt that your adventure would have a favorable outcome, I reproached myself with the unfair suspicions that I had had of the probity of that generous monster, and I asked him 1,000 times forgiveness for the insults that, internally, my pain had forced me to utter against him. Without revealing to my children the magnitude of my fortune, I was content to give them what you sent them, and make them see some jewels of a very modest value. Later I pretended that I had sold them and that I had used the money to procure a more comfortable life. I bought this house. I have slaves that exempt us from the works to which the need submitted. My children enjoy a relieved life. That was all my desire. The ostentation and the fasto, in other times, won the envy of many, and if I gave my heirs a rich millionaire, that would happen again. There are many games, Bella, who appear for your sisters. From one moment to another I will marry them, and your happy arrival leads me to do so. Once you have given the part that you assign them to the goods you tried, without having to worry about giving them a situation, we will live, my daughter, with your brothers, to whom your present have not been able to comfort your loss. Or, if you prefer, we will live together for us." The beautiful, moved with the benefits of her father and with the testimony she gave her of her brothers, affectionately thanked her for all those offerings and believed that it was her duty not to hide that she had not returned to stay with him. The good man, sorry for not having his daughter as a support of his old age, did not try, however, to separate her from a duty that he recognized as something indispensable. The beauty, in turn, made him the story of everything that had happened to him in his absence. He told him about the happy life he carried. The good man, happy with the lovely details of his daughter's adventures, covered the beast of blessings. His joy was much greater when Beautiful, opening her boxes, made her see immense wealth, and he felt free to dispose of her family she had brought, since she had enough with those last tests of generosity of the beast to live pleasantly with her children. Finding that this monster had a soul too beautiful to be housed in such a horrible body, he considered that it was his duty to advise his daughter that, despite his ugliness, he married him. He came to use the most powerful reasons to make him make that decision. "You should not rely on what your eyes show you," he said. "Incessantly you urge to let yourself be guided by things. Following the impulses that this inspires you, you are assured that you will be happy. It is true that you only receive those notices in dreams, but those dreams are too coherent and occur too often to attribute them only randomly. They promise you considerable advantages, and that is enough for you to come your disgust. So, when the beast asks you if you want to go to bed with you, I advise you not to reject it. You have confessed that he loves you endearing. Take the appropriate measures for your union to be eternal. It is more convenient to have a friendly husband than one whose only merit is good. How many young women are there those who make them marry with rich fools, but more dumb than the beast, which is only for the face and not for feelings and actions?" The Beautiful agreed with all these reasons. But deciding to take a horrible monster for his factions, and whose spirit was as rough as the body, was something that did not seem possible. How to decide, he replied to his father, to choose a husband with whom I will not be able to talk, and whose face will not be corrected by a pleasant dialogue. Lack how much I can distract me and make me forget that dire relationship. Never have the pleasure of being sometimes far from him. limit all my pleasure to 5 or 6 questions about my appetite and my health. Seeing how that strange conversation ends with a "good night, beautiful" chorus that my parrots are known by heart and repeat 100 times per day. No, it is not in my power to do such a marriage, and I prefer to die once before dying every day of fear, sorrow, disgust, and boredom. There is nothing to speak in his favor outside the attention that the beast of making me a short visit and not presenting himself to me but every 20-4 hours. Is that enough to inspire love? The father admitted that his daughter was right, but seeing so much kindness in the beast, I did not believe it was so stupid. The order, the abundance, the good taste that reigned in his palace were not, according to him, the work of a moron. In short, he found her worthy of her daughter's attention, and the Bella would have liked the monster a bit, if her knight lover was not there to put an obstacle. The parallel he made between those two in love could not be advantageous to the beast. The same old man did not ignore the big difference that had to be made between one. However, he still tried by all means to overcome his daughter's disgust. He reminded him of the advice of the lady, who had warned him that he was not fooled by the first view, and that, with his speeches, he seemed to have wanted to make him understand that the young man could only make it unhappy. It is easier to reason about the love than to overcome it. The beauty had no strength to surrender to the repeated pleas of her father. He separated from her without being able to persuade her. The knight, already very advanced, invited her to rest, and that girl, even if she was delighted to see him again, did not dislike that he was released. He felt happy to stay alone. His dreamy eyes made him expect that he would soon see, while he sleeps, his beloved crush. He felt impatient for enjoying that sweet pleasure. A tender eagerness was the mark of joy that his tender heart could feel with such beautiful treatment. But although his imagination showed him the places where he used to have lovely conversations with the beloved unknown, and that they had been recorded in it, he was not powerful enough to make him see as she had wished. He woke up several times, fell asleep several times, and the angels of love did not flutter around his bed. To put it all, instead of the night full of pleasure and innocent pleasures that he had trusted to spend in the arms of the dream, that was for her an extremely long night and full of concerns. In the Palacio de la Beast, a similar night had ever spent, and the day, which saw born with a kind of satisfaction and impatience, came timely to free it from those cruel sorrows. His father, enriched with the liberalities of the beast, and to be able to provide a situation to his daughters, had left the country house. He lived in a big city, in which his new fortune had just earned new friends, or, rather, new acquaintances. Among the people who frequented soon, the rumor ran that the youngest of his daughters was back. Everyone showed the same eagerness to see it, and they all were as delighted with their intelligence as with their person. The calm days she had spent in her desert palace, the innocent pleasures that a sweet dream lavished incessantly, the 1,000 distractions that had happened to each other so that the boredom did not enter its heart. Anyway, all the monster's attention had contributed to make it even more beautiful and more lovely than it was before her father left her. It was the admiration of those who saw her. The suitors of their sisters, without bothering to disguise their infidelity under a pretext, fell in love with it, and attracted by the strength of their charms, were not ashamed in the least for abandoning their first in love. Insensitive to the too evident attentions of a multitude of worshippers, the beautiful spared efforts to discourage them and make them return to their first loves. But despite all their efforts, it was not sheltered from the jealousy of their sisters. Those inconstant in love, far from hiding their new ardors, invented some new party every day to make the court. They even begged him to establish an award capable of encouraging the games they wanted to do in his honor. But the beautiful one, who could not ignore the penalty that caused her sisters and did not want to refuse to the favor that she was so strongly and in such a gallant way, she found a way to content them all, declaring that her sisters and she would successively give the awards that the victors had deserved. What she promised was nothing more than a flower or something similar. He left his elder sisters the vanity of giving, on the other hand, jewelry, diamond crowns, splendid weapons or superb bracelets, gifts that supplied their liberal hand and of those who did not want to pride herself. The treasures that the monster had lavished him did not let him miss anything. He shared with his sisters everything the most extraordinary and elegant he had led, giving only bagatelle of themselves, and leaving their sisters the pleasure of giving a lot. I hope to induce young people both to love and thanks. But those in love wanted to conquer their heart, and what she gave them was much more precious than all the treasures that lavished them. The pleasures of those who enjoyed in the midst of his family, although much lower than those who enjoyed the beast's house, entertained her enough to prevent him from getting bored. However, the satisfaction of seeing his father, whom he loved dearly, the pleasure of being with his brothers, that of 100 different ways struggled to show him all the affection they felt for her, and the joy of talking with his sisters, whom he loved even if they did not correspond to him, none of that could prevent him from missing his pleasant dreams. In her father's house, her stranger, what a shame for her, she was no longer going in the middle of her dreams to tell her the most tender words. The attention that the lovers of their sisters had with her did not compensate for the loss of that imaginary pleasure. Even if he had had a character that made her able to boast of such conquests, she knew how to differentiate perfectly between her application and the one that the beast and her kind strangers showed for her. The attention of young people only received the greatest indifference, but the beautiful, seeing her stubbornness in competing with each other to prove the most passionate love, despite the coldness she showed them, she thought it was her duty to announce that they wasting time. The first one who tried to disappoint was the suitor of his older sister, who told her that she had only returned with her family to attend the marriage of her sisters, especially that of the eldest, and that she was going to beg her father to rush. Beauty did not meet a man seduced by his sister's qualities. He no longer had sighs more than for her, and neither her coldness, nor her disdain, nor the threat of going back once after 2 months were able to deter it. A fetish for not having successful with his project, he told others, and sorry to verify that they housed similar feelings. To top it up for sadness, her unfair sisters, who considered her a rival, conceived for her an aversion that they could not hide, and while the beautiful deplored the too large effect that her charms possessed, she had the pain, in addition, to find out that her new suitors, thinking that they were hindered to each other, and that the opposition between them was the cause that none was favored, they came to be shot. All those dislikes made him conceive the purpose of leaving sooner than he had decided. His father and his brothers did everything to retain her, but, a slave to his word and firm in his resolution, the tears of one and the prayers of the others could not bend it. All they obtained was to postpone his departure as much as he could. The 2 months had passed, and every morning he took the resolution to say goodbye to his family. But when night came, I had no strength to do it. Debating between love and gratitude, he could not decide on the first without being unfair to the second. In the midst of his confusion, the only thing he could do to be decided was a dream. While he slept, he believed that he was in the Palacio de la Beast, on a section, at the end of which there was a strong covered weeds that hid the entrance of a cave from which horrible groans came out. He recognized the voice of the beast, and came to help her. The monster, which in the dream appeared to him lying on the ground and agonizing, reproached him that she was the cause that he was in that sad state, and that he would have paid his love with the most cruel ingratitude. Then he saw the lady whom he had already seen in dreams, who told him in a severe tone that he would be lost by little to take his promises, that he had promised the beast that he would return after 2 months, those who had already passed, that if it took another day, the beast was going to die. That the disorder he caused in his father's house and the hatred of his sisters had to induce her with so much pleasure that in the palace of the beast everything contributed to please her. The beautiful, frightened with this dream and fearing to be the cause of the death of the beast, woke up suddenly, and without delay she went to tell the whole family that she did not want to delay her departure. The news raised different reactions. The father let his tears speak, the brothers declared that they would not leave her leave, and the lovers, dams of despair, swore that they would ride guard around the house. Only the daughters, far from appearing afflicted by their sister's departure, had only praises for their good faith. Even adorning themselves with that virtue, they had the boldness to ensure that, if they had given their word, as the beautiful had done, the appearance of the beast would not make them doubt in fulfilling such a fair duty, and they would already be back in that wonderful palace. That way they wanted to hide the cruel jealousy they had in their hearts. However, the beautiful, delighted with her apparent feelings of generosity, already thought of convincing her brothers and her suitors of the obligation she was moving away from them. But her brothers loved her too much to accept her departure, and the suitors, too much in love with her, did not enter reasons. Both, who ignored how beautiful had returned to her father's house and did not doubt that the horse that the first time had taken her to the beast's palace again to look for her, unanimously resolved to oppose it. The sisters, who only showed the appearance of an alleged good faith to hide the intimate joy they felt, seeing that the moment of the game of Belle approached, feared more than the death than the lovers delayed it. But the beautiful, firm in her resolution, knowing where she called her duty and without wanting a loss of time to prevent him from prolonging the days to the beast, her benefactor, she said goodbye, as soon as the night came, of her whole family and of those who were interested in her destiny. He assured them that, no matter how attentive they were to prevent their departure, he would be next to the beast the next morning before they woke up, and that he wanted to return to the delighted palace. He did not forget, at bedtime, to turn the ring. His dream was long and he only woke up when the clock, giving the 12, made him hear his name made music. Thanks to that signal he understood that his wishes had been fulfilled. When he had signs that he no longer wanted to sleep, the animals that had been solicitous to serve her surrounded her bed. Everyone expressed the satisfaction they felt with his return, and made him known the pain that his long absence had caused them. That day it seemed longer than all that had passed in that place, not because he missed the company he had left, but because he was impatient to see the beast again, and did not want to omit anything that could justify her. Another hope also encouraged her, to have, during sleep, the pleasant conversations with the stranger, pleasure that had been deprived during the 2 months that he had just passed with his family, and that he could only enjoy in the enclosure of that palace. In short, the beast and the stranger were, alternatively, the object of their thoughts. At times it was reproached not to correspond to a lover that under a monstrous figure showed such a beautiful soul. At other times he felt sad to give his heart to a fantastic image that only had the existence that dreams lent him. He doubted if his heart should prefer a chimera before the real love of a beast. The dream that made his handsome unknown continuously prevented him from noting his eyes. He feared that it was only a vain illusion, of which the vapors of the sleep and that annihilate the awakening are born. Thus, always undecided, in love with the stranger, without wanting to displease the beast and without trying to take care of anything that were not their pleasures, he went to the French comedy, which seemed most insulting. He sharply closed the window, thinking of getting out of the opera. The music seemed unfortunate. Neither does the Italian comedy had the virtue of distracting it. It seemed that the work lacked mischief, spark and coherence. The boredom that followed her, did not allow her to find pleasure anywhere. In the gardens he found no liking. The court that surrounded her tried to have fun. Some lost the fruit of their jumps and others that of their beautiful speeches and its kisses. I was impatient to receive the visit from the beast, whose steps seemed to hear at every moment. But that desired time came without the beast appeared. Alarmed, and as angry at that delay, I could not imagine what the cause of his absence could be. Floating between fear and hope, with the agitated spirit and the heart full of sadness, he went down to the gardens, resolved not to return to the palace until he finds the beast. He saw no trace in any of the places he toured. He called her, and only the echo repeated her screams. After spending more than 3 hours in that unpleasant exercise, and defeated by fatigue, he sat on a bank. He imagined that the beast was dead, or that he had abandoned those places. He was alone in that palace, without hope of leaving him. I missed the talks with the beast, even if they were not fun for her, and what seemed extraordinary was to discover that it was so sensitive to what happened to that monster. He reproached himself not having married him, considering himself responsible for his death. Because he feared that his absence would have caused it too long, he became the toughest and most ruthless reproaches. In the midst of these sad reflections, he realized that he was on the same path in which, the last night he had spent at his father's house, he had imagined the agonizing monster in an unknown cavern. Persuaded that it had not been the pure chance that had taken her there, he directed her steps towards the fort, which did not find difficult access. There he saw a cavern that, as it seemed, was the same as he had believed to see in dreams. As the moon only gave a weak light, the page's monkeys immediately appeared with a sufficient amount of torches to illuminate that club and allow you to see the beast lying on the ground, apparently asleep. Far from being scared to see her, the beautiful felt very happy, approached her without fear and ran her hand through her head, calling her several times. But feeling it cold and without movement, he no longer hesitated that he was dead, which made him shouts of pain and say the most moving things in the world. The certainty of his death did not prevent him, however, strive to revive her. When he put his hand in his heart, he felt, with a joy that cannot be expressed, that he was still breathing. Without wasting time to make more caresses, the beautiful one left the cavern and ran to a source, from which she took water with her hands and then returned and threw it into the face of the beast. But since he could only get very little every time and spilled it before arriving next to the beast, his help would have been late without the help of the courtly monkeys, who ran to the palace and returned with such diligence that, at one time, he had a jug with which to load water and fortifying liquors. He made the beast inhale and drink the spirits, which, producing an admirable effect, returned the movement somewhat and, shortly after, made it return to itself. He encouraged him with a living voice and stroked it so much that he ended up recovering. "What concern you caused me," he said tenderly to the beast. "I didn't know to what extent I loved you. The fear of losing to you made me know that I am linked to you for stronger ties than those of gratitude. I swear that I only thought about dying if I could not save your life." Upon hearing these tender words, the beast, which felt completely relieved, replied in a voice that however was still weak, "You are very good, beautiful, to love such an ugly monster, but you do well. I love you more than my own life." He believed you wouldn't return. That would have killed me. Since you love me, I want to live. Go rest and be sure that you will be as happy as your good heart deserves it. Beauty had not yet heard of the beast for such a long speech. He was not eloquent, but he liked the tone of sweetness and sincerity he thought he noticed in him. It was expected to scold her or, at least, to make her reproaches. He had, from that moment, a better opinion of the character of the beast, as it did not seem so stupid. He even considered that his short responses were a prudence feature, and more arranged in his favor, he retired to his rooms with his mind full of the most flattering ideas. The beautiful, tired, found there all the refreshments she needed. His heavy eyelids promised him a sweet dream. As soon as he lay down, he fell asleep, and his beloved stranger soon presented himself. To express the pleasure I felt about seeing her again, how many affectionate things he said. He assured him that he would be happy, that it was only about following the impulses dictated by the goodness of his heart. The beautiful one asked if that happened marrying the beast. The stranger replied that this was the only means of achieving it. The beautiful felt a kind of spite, even seemed extraordinary for her lover to advise her to make her rival happy. After that first dream, he thought he saw the dead beast at his feet. A moment later, the stranger appeared and disappeared at the same time to let the beast occupy its place. To the one that distinguished more clearly it was the lady, who seemed to tell her, "I am happy with you, always follow the impulse of your reason and do not worry about anything, I take care of becoming happy." The beautiful, despite being asleep, seemed to show her inclination for the stranger and her disgust for the monster, which did not seem worthy of being loved. The lady smiled at her scruples and noted that her love for the stranger should not worry her, that the impulses he felt in her had nothing incompatible with their intention to fulfill their duty, that she could give to that intention without resistance, and that her happiness would be perfect marrying the beast. That dream, which ended when she woke up, was for her an inexhaustible source of reflections. In the latter, and in the others, he found more foundation than dreams usually have. This was what decided to give its consent to that strange hymns. But the image of the stranger did not stop disturbing her. It was the only obstacle, and it was not small. Always doubting what he had to do, he went to the opera without his confusion ceasing. At the exit of the show, he sat at the table. Only the arrival of the beast was able to make it decide. Far from reproaching his long absence, the monster, as if the pleasure of seeing her had made her forget her past sorrows, seemed, when she entered the rooms, a beautiful, not having another eagerness than to know if she had fun a lot, if they had received her well, and if she had stayed with good health. She answered all those questions, and added politely that she had paid very expensive all the pleasures she had thanks to the beast, since they had been followed by cruel penalties due to the state in which she had found her. The beast thanked him with very few words, after which, wanting to say goodbye, he asked, as usual, if he wanted him to lie with her. Beauty remained a moment without answering, but finally, resigning, he said trembling, "Yes, beast, I accept it, as long as you give me your marriage and receive mine." "I give it to you," said the beast, "and I promise you that I will never have another wife." "And I," said the beautiful, "I receive you for a husband and swear you love and faithfulness." As soon as these words had pronounced, an artillery download was heard, and so that he did not hesitate that it was as a sign of rejoicing, he saw the sky in flames from the windows for the lighting of more than 20,000 rockets, which were renewed for 3 hours. The rockets formed tapes. There were gallant posters that represented the initials of the beautiful and could be read in well-drawn letters, "Long live the beautiful and her husband." When that charming show had lasted a lot, the beast told his new wife that it was time to go to bed. The Bella lay down, however impatient she was to be next to that unique husband. The lights went out immediately. The beast, when approaching, made the beautiful fear to crush the bed with the weight of her body. But she felt pleasantly surprised to feel that the monster got next to her as slightly as she had just done. Her surprise was much older when she heard her snore almost immediately and had, for her peace of mind, an undoubted proof that she slept with a deep sleep. Despite her surprise, accustomed as she was to extraordinary things, after reflecting for a few moments she slept as quietly as her husband, without hesitation that this dream was as mysterious as everything that happened in that palace. As soon as he had slept, his beloved stranger arrived, as usual, to visit her. "I was more cheerful and more groomed than ever. Am so grateful, lovely Bella," he said, "you free me from the horrific prison in which I had groaned for so long. Your marriage with the beast will return a king to his subjects, a son to his mother and life to his kingdom. We will all be happy." The beautiful, hearing this speech, felt a violent spite, seeing that the stranger, far from expressing the despair in which his commitment should plunge him, made excessive joy shine in front of his eyes. She was about to express her anger when the lady, in turn, appeared in the dream. "You have achieved victory," he said. "We owe everything, beautiful. You just prefer thanks to any other feeling. There is no one who, like you, would have had the strength to fulfill his word at the expense of his own satisfaction, or that he was able to expose his life to save his father's. As a reward, there is no one who can hope to enjoy a happiness equal to what your virtue has made you reach. Now you just know about it a very small part. The return of the sun will show you much more." After the lady, the beautiful saw the young man, but lying and as dead. All night he passed with different dreams. Those agitations had become familiar and did not prevent him from sleeping long. The daylight woke her up. He shone in the room much more than usual, since his cute had not closed the windows. That gave the chance to take a look at the beast. First he took the show he saw for a usual continuation of his dreams and believed that he kept dreaming. Then, when he could no longer doubt that what he saw was real, his joy and surprise were extreme. At night, when bedtime, he had run to the edge of the bed, thinking that he did not leave his horrible husband enough. At first he had snoring, but she, before falling asleep, had stopped hearing it. When he woke up, the silence he kept made him doubt that he was by his side, and imagining that he had risen quietly, turned around, to find out the truth, with the greatest caution possible, and had the pleasant surprise of finding, instead of the beast, his beloved stranger. As the sleeping lovely one seemed 1,000 times more beautiful than it was during the night. To be sure that it was really the same, and went to look on the dresser the portrait he used to carry in his arm. But it was impossible to stop recognizing it. Convinced of the unnatural character of his dream, he spoke to him with the hope of Caesar. As he did not wake up when he heard his voice, he threw his arm. This second attempt was also useless and only served to reveal that there was an enchantment in all that, which decided to let that spell pass, which, in a likely, had to have some prescribed period. As he was alone, he was not afraid to scandalize anyone with the freedoms that could be taken with him. In addition, she was her husband. Therefore, giving free rein to his tender feelings, he gave him 1,000 kisses and then resigned himself to patiently waiting for the end of that kind of lethargy. How happy she felt about being linked to the only one who had induced her to doubt, and having done what she would like to do for pleasure. He no longer doubted the joy they had promised him in his dreams. It was then that she realized that the lady had told her the truth, pointing out that it was not incompatible that she felt, at the same time, love for the beast and for her unknown, since both were nothing more than one. However, her husband did not wake up. After eating a little, he tried to distract himself with his ordinary occupations, but they seemed tasteless. As he did not decide to get out of his room, and not to be without doing anything, he opened a score and began to sing. His birds, hearing her, they made in concert both more lovely as the beautiful was still waiting for her husband's awakening to interrupt him, since she was excited to cancel the enchantment with the harmony of her voice. Indeed, the concert was interrupted, but not in the way he had expected. Beauty heard the unusual noise of a float under the windows of her rooms and the voice of several people who approached her room. At the same time, the monkey captain of the guard announced, through the peak of his trudgeman parrot, the arrival of some ladies. The beautiful looked through the windows and saw the float in which they had arrived. It was of a very original style and an unparalleled beauty. For a white deer, with golden and over-bitty cornels and hooves, pulled that carriage, whose singularity increased the desire of the beautiful to meet the ladies to which he belonged. Because of the noise, which was increasing, he knew that those ladies approached and that they must be close to the antechamber. She believed herself forced to meet her. There were two. In one of them he recognized the lady who used to see in dreams. The other was no less beautiful. His haughty and distinguished air gave enough samples that he was an illustrious person. This unknown had already left its first youth behind, but it looked so majestic that the beautiful did not know which of the two welcomed. She was still undecided when the lady who already knew, and that she seemed to have some superiority about the other, she said, directing the word to her partner, "Well, Queen, what do you think of this beautiful girl? You owe your child's return to life, since you will agree that the deplorable way he lived cannot be called life. Without it, you would never have seen the prince again, and he would have remained the horrible creature in which they had transformed it if a unique person had not existed in the world, whose virtue and courage equal their beauty. I think you'll see with pleasure that the son she returns to you is her. They love each other, and their perfect happiness only lacks your consent. Will you deny it?" The queen, hearing these words, affectionately kissed the beautiful and exclaimed, "You deny my consent. I find my supreme happiness. Lovely and virtuous girl, whom I owe so much, tell me who you are, tell me the name of the sovereign happy enough to have given birth to such a perfect princess." "Sir," the beautiful replied, "I haven't had a mother for a long time. My father is a better known merchant in the world for his good faith and his misfortunes than for his lineage." Before this sincere statement, the queen, surprised, backed away 2 steps and said, "How? You are just the daughter of a merchant. Ah, fairy excelsa," he added, looking at her with mortified expression. After those few words he shut up, but his appearance showed sufficiently what he thought, and his eyes expressed his anger. "It seems to me," said the fairy, "you're not happy with my choice. The condition of this young woman raises your contempt. However, it was the only one in the world that I could be able to carry out my project and make your son happy." "I am very grateful," the queen replied, "but I can't stop making you see, powerful intelligence," he added, "I miss the union of the most beautiful blood in the world, from which my son comes, with the dark blood from which the person you want to join. I confess that I am doing little the supposed happiness of this prince, if it is necessary to obtain it through such a shameful marriage to us as unworthy for him. Is it impossible for a person to exist in the world whose virtue they match their lineage? I know the name of so many esteemed princesses, why will I not be allowed to excite me to see that he possesses one of them?" While arguing this matter, the handsome unknown was presented. The arrival of his mother and fairy had awakened him, and the noise they made had more power than all the efforts of beautiful, since the nature of the enchantment was provided. The queen hugged him for a long time without uttering a single word. He found a son whose beautiful qualities made him worthy of his love. What a joy for that prince to be free of a horrible aspect, and of both more painful stupidity, as it was postponed, and had not obscured his reason. He regained the freedom to show himself in his ordinary form thanks to the object of his love, and that made her even more precious to him. After the first outburst for his mother that the blood had just inspired him, the prince interrupted them to comply with the duty and recognition that urged him to thank the fairy. He did it in the most respectful and more sparse terms, to have the freedom to direct his attention to Belle. He had already shown his affection with his tender looks, and to confirm what his eyes had said, he was going to add the most moving terms when the fairy interrupted him and told him that he took him as a judge between his mother and her. "Your mother," he said, "reproves the commitment you've made with Beautiful. It seems to him that his lineage is unworthy of yours. As regards me, I think that their virtues make inequality disappear. To you, Prince, it is up to you to decide which of us think according to your liking. To have whole freedom to make us known your authentic feelings, I declare you that you are not tied by the obligation. Even if you have given your marriage to this lovely person, you can withdraw it. I am guarantor that the Beautiful will return it to you without any difficulty, even if it is thanks to its goodness as you have recovered your natural form. I also assure you that her generosity will cause her disinterest to be released until she is released to dispose of your hand in favor of the person to whom the Queen advises you to give it. What do you say, Beautiful?" He continued, the fairy turning to the young woman. "Have I been wrong to explain what your feelings are? Would you want to have a husband who was in spite of his?" "Of course not, ma'am," the Belle replied. "The prince is free. I renounced the honor of being his wife. When I accepted his word, he thought he was helping someone who was below the human being. I committed myself to him with the sole intention of doing a huge favor. The ambition had no part in my intentions. For this reason, Fairy Excelsa, I beg you to do nothing to the Queen in an issue in which I cannot condemn her scruples." "Well, Queen, what do you say to this?" said the fairy in a disdainful and offended tone. "Do you think that the princesses that are only in the whim of fortune deserve more the high rank in which fate has placed them than this young woman? As for me, I think it would not have to be considered responsible for an origin that her virtue enhances enough," the Queen replied, something confusing. "Beauty is incomparable. Her merit is infinite. No one is superior. But ma'am, could we not find another means of rewarding her? Can I do it without sacrificing my son's hand?" "Yes, Bella," the Queen told this one, "I owe you so much that I don't know how to thank you. I do not set limits on your wishes. Express without fear what you want. I will grant everything to you, outside that single point, but the difference will not be great for you. Choose a husband in my court. As great as it may be, you will have reasons to be considered happy, and in consideration towards you I will put it so close to the throne that there will almost be no difference." "I thank you, ma'am," the beauty replied. "I have no reward to demand. It is enough for me to pay the joy of ceasing the enchantment that separated a prince of his mother and his kingdom. My happiness would be perfect if I were my sovereign to whom I had done this favor. The only thing I want is for the fairy to deign to return to my father's house." The prince, who, by order of the fairy, had kept silent during all these speeches, could not contain himself for longer, and the respect he felt by such unpleasant norms was no longer able to stop him. He threw himself at the feet of the fairy and his mother, and strongly begged them not to make him more unfortunate than he was, moving the Beautiful and depriving him of the happiness of being his husband. Upon hearing these words, Bella posed in him a look full of love, but also loaded with noble pride, and said, "I can't, Prince, hide the feelings I have for you. The end of the enchantment gives you the proof of them, and it would be in vain to try to hide them. I confess, without blushing, that I love you more than myself. Why would you have to hide it? Only criminal impulses must be denied. Mine are full of innocence, and are authorized by the consent of the generous fairy to which you and I owe so much. But if I could decide to give up them when I thought my duty ordered me to sacrifice them for the beast, you must be sure that I will not change this time, when it is no longer the interest of a monster but about yours. It is enough for me to know who you are and who I am to give up the honor of being your wife. I even say that, even when the Queen, defeated by your pleas, grant you the consent you want, she would do nothing for you because in my reason, and in my very love, you will find an insurmountable obstacle. I repeated, the only favor I ask is to return to my family, where I will keep an eternal memory of your gentleness and your love. Generous fairy, said the prince, gathering his hands pleadingly, please prevent Beautiful from leaving. Rather, return my monstrous appearance. With that condition I will continue to be her husband. It is the beast to whom he gave his marriage word, and I prefer that advantage to all those who seek me, if I cannot enjoy them without having to pay them so expensive. The fairy remained unanswered. He stared at the queen, who was moved to see so many virtues but whose pride remained uncommonly's. His son's pain afflicted her, but he couldn't forget that Belle was a daughter of a merchant and nothing else. However, he feared the anger of the fairy, whose expression and silence showed his outrage clearly. His confusion was immense. Without forces to say a single word, he feared that he ended a conversation that offended protective intelligence. For a few moments nobody spoke, but the fairy finally broke the silence and, looking with affection to the two lovers, he told them, I find them worthy of each other. It is not possible, without committing a crime, thinking about separating two beings from so much merit. They will remain united, I promise it, I have enough power to do it. The queen shuddered when he heard these words. He would have opened his mouth to make some observations, but the fairy was ahead, saying, as for you, queen, the little case you do of a strict virtue of those operations that are the only thing that estimates would authorize me to make you bitter reproaches. But I forgive this lack of pride that inspires the rank you occupy, and my only revenge will be the little imposition that I make you, and for which it will not spend much time before I thank myself. The Beautiful, hearing these words, hugged the fairy's knees and exclaimed, Ah! Do not expose me to the pain of hearing the rest of my life that I am reproached to be unworthy of the range to which your goodness wants to raise me. He thinks that the prince, who now believes that his happiness is to receive my hand, will perhaps think like the queen before spending a lot of time. No, no, Beautiful, they don't fear anything, said the fairy. The misfortunes that prevail cannot occur. I know a safe means of preserving you from them, and even in the event that the prince was able to despise you after having married you, I would have to look for another reason that was not that of the disparity of conditions. Your lineage is not lower than yours. You even take great advantage, since it is true, he told the queen, that this is your niece, and what should make it worthy of respect is that it is also mine, since it is my sister's daughter, the one who is not, like you, a slave to a dignity whose main luster must be virtue. That fairy, which knew how to estimate the true merit, made the king of the happy island, your brother, the honor of marrying him. I guarded the fruit of his loves from the fury of a fairy who wanted to be his mother-in-law. Since the Belle was born, I destined her to be your son's wife. I wanted, hiding my goodwill, to give your confidence time to show. I had some reason to think that you would trust me a little more. You could base you, for this, on my reveals for the fate of the prince. I had expressed a lot of interest in him so that you were afraid to expose him to anything dishonorable for you or for him. I am convinced, madam, he continued by saying with a smile that still showed a rest of acrimony, that you will no longer insist with your disdain, and that you will access to honor us with your alliance. The queen, perplexed and confusing, did not know what to answer. The only way to repair her fault was to confess her sincerely, and show true regret. I am guilty, generous fairy, he said. Your gentleness has to be for me the best guarantee that you would not let my son a marriage that could dishonor him. But I beg you, forgive the prejudices of an illustrious cradle, which told me that real blood could not join with another lower without that being shameful. I would deserve, I confess, that to punish me you gave the Beautiful a mother-in-law more dignified than me. But it is so generous is your interest in my son that you could not make it a victim of my faults. As for you, dear Belle, he continued by saying as he hugged her with love, you should not save me resentment for my resistance. His only cause was the desire to give my son to my niece, since the fairy had assured me that I was alive, although everything indicated otherwise. I had made her a portrait so charming that, without knowing you, I already had for you enough love to expose myself to the outrage of this intelligence, in order to keep you the throne and heart of my son. Said which, The queen began again with her pampering, and the beautiful received them with respect. The prince, on the other hand, delighted with that pleasant news, said with his looks the joy he felt. "Now we are all happy," said the fairy, "and to finish this happy adventure we only lack the consent of the king, the prince's father. But soon we will see it in person." The beauty begged her to allow him to raise her, and to whom she had believed life, he witnessed her happiness. "I like those concerns," said the fairy, "they are worthy of a beautiful soul, and, since you wish, I take care of sending him to warn him." Then, taking the queen from her hand, she took her with the pretext of making her see the enchanted palace. It was, in reality, to give new husbands the freedom to speak for the first time freely and without the help of illusion. They wanted to follow her, but she prohibited it. The happiness that they were going to enjoy them were overwhelmed with identical joy and could not doubt their mutual love. The messy and confusing conversation, the promises 100 times renewed, were for them a safer testimony of their love of what could have been a speech full of eloquence. After exhausting everything that, sometimes similar, love makes the people to whom he has touched his heart, the beautiful one asked his crush why misfortune had been so cruelly metamorphosed in beast. He also begged him to tell him all the events that had preceded the cruel metamorphosis. The prince, who, although he had changed his appearance, was not so solicitous in obeying her, spoke, without further delay, in these terms. Chapter 2. The king, my father, died before I came to the world. The queen would not have comforted her loss if the interest in the child she was carrying in her entrails would not have fought her pain. My birth caused immense joy. The bliss that could dissipate his affliction was reserved for the sweet pleasure of raising the fruit of the love of a husband who had loved so much. The care of my education and the fear of losing me were their only concern. For that task, he had the help of a known fairy of his, who was solicitous to preserve me of all kinds of accidents. The queen thanked him infinitely, but she did not feel happy when the fairy asked her to give me her. That intelligence had no reputation to be good. She was considered capricious with her favors, she feared her more than she loved, and even if my mother had been convinced of her kindness of character, she would not have decided to lose sight of me. However, advised by prudent people, and fearing to suffer from the new effects of the resentment of that vindictive fairy, he was not fully opposed. If I gave me voluntarily, it was not likely to hurt me. The experience had shown that it was only pleased to harm those who, in her opinion, had offended her. The queen recognized all that, and only rejected the idea of being deprived of the pleasure of looking at me continuously with her mother's eyes, which made her discover in me charms that I owned only to her good intention. He still doubted what he had to do, when a powerful neighbor believed that it would be easy to seize the states of a child governed by a woman. He entered my kingdom with a formidable army. The queen gathered one in a hurry and, with a courage that surpassed that of her sex, put at the head of her troops and went to defend our borders. It was then that, forced to leave me, she could not help entrusting the care of my education to the fairy. I was put in his hands after he swore for what was more sacred that, without opposing any difficulty, he would take me again to the court as the war ended, something that my mother trusted would happen in a year no later than. But despite all the triumphs he reached, he could not see our capital as soon. To get revenues to his victory, after throwing the enemy of our territory, he pursued him in his. He took entire provinces, won battles and finally, reduced the defeated to request a shameful peace, which only obtained low conditions. After those lucky achievements, the queen left triumphantly, savoring in advance the pleasure of seeing me again. But having heard while he was on his way that the unworthy enemy, violating the pacts made, had slaughtered our soldiers and had seized almost all the places he had been forced to give in, was forced to return to his steppes. The honor could more than the urgency he felt of being with me, and took the resolution not to end the war until he had put his enemy in the impossibility of committing new betrayals. The time he used in that new military expedition was enormous. He had been excited that 2 or 3 campaigns were enough, but he had to fight an adversary as skilled as perfidious, that he managed to make some provinces rebel and that whole battalions betrayed his bosses, which forced the queen not to get away from her army for 15 years. He never thought about calling me to his side. He always excited himself that he was in his last month of absence, and about to go see me. Meanwhile, the fairy, according to his promise, had dedicated all his efforts to my education. From the day I had taken back to my kingdom, I had stayed with me and had not ceased to show me his attention in everything concerning my health and my pleasures. I showed him, with my respect, how sensitive it was to his attention. I had with her the same consideration and the same request that I had had for my mother, and thanks inspired me in her favor equally affectionate feelings. For some time he seemed satisfied with them. But he made a trip that took him a few years, for a secret reason that he did not communicate to me, and upon his return, full of admiration for the result of his care, he conceived for me a different love from a mother. I had allowed me to give him that name, but from that moment he prohibited it. I obeyed him without finding out the reasons I could have for it, and without suspecting what he demanded of me. I realized very well that I was not happy, but could I imagine the reason for the complaints for my ingratitude that directed me incessantly? I felt so much more surprised by his reproaches as he did not think they deserved them. These always followed or preceded the most affectionate attention. I had too little experience to understand them. It was necessary to explain. He did a day when I expressed a penalty of impatience for the delay of the Queen. He made some reproaches for that, and as I assured him that the love for my mother did not alter anything that owed her, she replied that she was not at all jealous of my mother, despite having done much for me and having resolved to do more. But he added that, to give free course to what he intended to do in my favor, it was necessary for me to marry her, that he did not want her to love her like a mother but like a lover, who did not doubt that I would receive her proposal with gratitude and feel great joy to accept her, that from then on it was only to abandon me to the pleasure that I had to cause me the certainty of possessing such a powerful fairy, that I would protect me from all the dangers and I would seek a life full of charms and full of glory. I felt confusing at that proposal. As I had been educated in my own country, I knew the world enough to have observed that among married people there were some who were happy due to age and temperament compliance, and others very worthy of pity because different circumstances had put among them an antipathy that could become an ordeal. The old, ugly and haughty fairy did not allow me to wait for a life that was as pleasant as she promised me. I was very far from feeling for her what you have to feel for a person with whom you want to spend your life pleasantly. On the other hand, I didn't want to commit myself as young. My only passion was the desire to see the Queen again and stand out at the head of her armies. I sighed for my freedom. It was the only thing that I could flatter, the only thing that the fairy denied me. I had often begged to allow me to share the dangers in which I knew that the Queen rushed to defend my interests, but my pleas had been useless until that day. He was urged to respond to the surprising statement that made me. I felt confusing and made him remember that, often, he had told me that I was not allowed to have myself without my mother's orders and during his absence. "It's what I think," he said. "I would not want to force you to act in another way. It is enough for you to follow the will of the Queen. I have already told you, beautiful princess, that I had not been able to get that fairy to give me the freedom to go find my mother the Queen. The desire she felt to achieve the satisfaction she hoped to obtain forced her to grant me, without me to ask him again, which had always denied me. But he put a condition that was not pleasant to me, that she would accompany me. I did my best to get the idea, but it was impossible, and we started followed by a large escort. We arrive on the eve of a decisive battle. The Queen had arranged everything so well that the next day she had to decide the fate of the enemy, which no more resources had left in case of losing the battle. My presence caused in the camp an extreme pleasure, and did nothing more than increase the courage of the troops, which saw on my arrival a favorable augury for victory. The Queen believed that she was dying of joy. But after that first outburst, the pleasure that had caused him gave way to the most alive alarm. While I was excited about the sweet hope of covering me with glory, the Queen was shaking in view of the danger to which I was going to expose me. Too brave herself to want to separate me from him, he begged me, in the name of all his love, that he did not expose me more than what the honor could demand it. He begged the fairy not to abandon me in that trance. His pleas were not necessary. That intelligence as sensitive had as many fears as the Queen, because I knew no secret capable of preserving the risks of war. For the rest, he made a lot inspiring me, in an instant, the art of commanding an army and prudence appropriate to such a great task. The most experienced bosses admired me. Once I owned the battlefield, the victory was complete. I had the joy of saving the Queen's life and preventing him from being made prisoner of war. The enemies suffered such vigorous persecution that they left the camp, lost their supplies and more than 3/4 of their army, while we only had very unimportant losses. A slight wound that I received was the only achievement that the enemy could boast. But as that event made the Queen fear that, if the war continued, they happened to me greater evils, against the desires of the army, who with my presence had seen the spirits redoubled, made peace offering more advantageous conditions than the defeated would have dared to expect. A short time later we returned to the road to the capital, in which we entered triumphant. The occupations of war and the continuous presence of my old love had prevented me from preventing the Queen of this last incident. His surprise had no limits when that Harpia told him, without rodeos, that he was resolved to marry with me immediately. That statement was made in this same palace, which was not as superb as it is today. It was the recreation house of the late king, and thousands of occupations had prevented him from thinking about beautifying her. My mother, who felt attachment for everything he had loved, had chosen him preferably to rest from war fatigue. Upon hearing the fairy statement, unable to master his first impulse and unknown the art of pretending, he exclaimed, "Lord, have you thought about the strange couple that you proposed to me? It is true that another more ridiculous could have been found." In addition to the decrepit old age of the fairy, it was so ugly that it was afraid. It was not the years that had affected her. If she had beauty in her youth, she could have kept her with the help of her art. But, as it was naturally ugly, his power could barely give artificial beauties a single day per year, and once the day was elapsed, he returned to his previous state. The fairy was surprised at the Queen's statement. His self-love hid him how horrible he was, and gave his power that his power could supplant the attractions of which he was devoid. "What do you mean," he said to the Queen, "with that strange couple? He thinks it is reckless to remember it when I fear forgot. The only thing you should think about is to rejoice in having a child worthy enough to be loved, so that their merits make me prefer the most powerful geniuses of all the elements, and since I am worth lowering to him, he receives with respect the honor that I have the goodness of making you, without giving me time to change their minds." The Queen, as haughty as the fairy, had never understood that there was a range that was above the throne. It gave very little importance to the supposed honor that intelligence did. As he had always given orders to those who approached him, he did not ambition at all the advantage of having a daughter-in-law to which he had to keep his respect. In such a way that, instead of responding, he remained motionless and was content to keep his eyes fixed on me. I was as surprised as she, and, as I looked at her in the same way she did with me, it was not difficult for him to understand that our silence spontaneously expressed feelings extremely opposite to the joy she thought she inspired us. "What does what am seeing?" he said with acrimony. "Why do the mother and son say nothing? Has this pleasant surprise deprived them of the use of the voice, or is that they are so blind and reckless not to accept my offer? Speak, Prince," he told me. "Will you be so ungrateful and so reckless as to despise my benefits? Don't you accept, at this moment, give me your hand?" "No, madam, I assure you," I said with precipitation. "Even if I feel a sincere thanks for everything I owe you, I cannot decide to pay my debt in this way, and if the Queen allows me, I don't want to lose my freedom so soon. Give me any other means of recognizing your benefits, none will seem impossible. But as for you to propose to me, dispute me, I beg you, to make use of it, because—" "How, miserable creature," he interrupted me with fury, "you dare to resist me? And you, stupid Queen, contemplate without outraging a similar pride. But what do I say, indignation? If it is from your insolent gaze where he has taken the audacity of his answer." The Queen, already disgusted by the derogatory expressions that the fairy had used, could not contain himself, and coincidentally looking at a mirror in front of us while the evil fairy continued to harass her, replied, "What can I tell you that you have not had to tell yourself? Tell yourself to look at the objects that this mirror presents to you, he will answer you for me." The fairy easily understood what the Queen wanted to tell him. Is it, then, the beauty of this beautiful son of you who makes you so vain, he said, and that is what exposes me to a shameful rejection? I seem unworthy of him. Well, he continued, raising his voice in a furious tone after having lavished all my care to make him so charming, I have to crown my work and make both a gift as new as perceptible, so that they remember everything they owe me. Come on, miserable, he said, dripping up, having denied me your heart and your hand, offer them to the one that seems more worthy of receiving them than me. Saying these words, my terrible crush hit me on the head. It was so rude that I found my face on the floor, and I thought I had crushed a mountain. Very angry with that insult, I wanted to stand up, but it was impossible for me. The weight of my body was so great that it prevented me. All I could do was sustain myself with my hands, which in an instant had become horrible legs. It was enough for me to see them to realize my change. It was the appearance I had when you were in the act. I looked at the fatal mirror and can no longer doubt my cruel and sudden metamorphosis. The pain I felt when I saw that left me motionless. The queen, before the tragic show, was out of her. To crown his barbarism, that furious fairy added in a mocking tone, now to make illustrious conquests, and more worthy than an august fairy. And since intelligence is not needed when one is so beautiful, I order you that you look as stupid as horrible, and that you expect in this state to return to your first way, to that a beautiful and young girl voluntarily comes to your side, even if she is persuaded that you are going to devour her, and that, once she has stopped fearing for her life, she gets so much affection that she proposes that you marry you. Until you have found that unusual person, I want you to be a reason for horror for yourself and for all those who see you. And as for you, a very happy mother of such a lovely son, he told the queen I warn you that if you declare someone who this monster is your son, he can never change his appearance. You will have to leave it without the help of interest, ambition and the charms of your intelligence. Bye-bye. Do not lose patience, they won't have to wait long. It is beautiful enough to find a remedy to its ills. Oh, cruel, said the queen, if my rejection has offended you, see me. Take my life, but do not destroy your work, I beg you. What an idea, great princess, said the fairy in an ironic tone, you've reduced you too much, am not beautiful enough to tell me to talk to me, but my decisions are firm. Goodbye, powerful queen, goodbye beautiful prince, it is not fair that you get tired more with my odious presence. I retire, but I still have the charity of warning you, he said, turning to me, that you have to forget who you are. If you leave flattering for vain respects or lavish titles, you are lost without remedy. And you will also lose yourself if you dare to use your intelligence to please the conversation. These words disappeared and left us, the queen and me, in a state that cannot be described or imagined. Complaints are the consolation of the unfortunate. For us it was a weak help. My mother decided to stab and go to throw me into a nearby channel. We were both, without having told us, to carry out such a dire purpose, when a person of majestic bearing, and whose appearance inspired a deep respect, came to make us understand that it is cowardly succumbing to the greatest accidents, and that with time and courage there is no misfortune that cannot be defeated. But the queen had no comfort, her eyes poured tears into abundance, and without knowing how to communicate to her subjects that her sovereign had become a horrible beast, only the appeal of atrocious despair was left. The fairy, since it was a fairy, and the same one that you see here, aware of her pain and her bewilderment, reminded the queen the indispensable obligation she had to hide her people from that horrific adventure. He made him see that, without abandoning despair, it was preferable to look for some remedy to his ills. Does anyone there, said the queen, to be powerful enough to prevent the will of a fairy from doing? Yes, ma'am, the fairy replied, there's a remedy for everything. I am a fairy, like that one whose fury you have just suffered. I have no less power than her. It is true that I cannot immediately repair the damage it has done to you, since we are not allowed to directly oppose our respective wills. The one that causes your misfortune has lived more than me. Among us, old age is a respectable title. As he could not help putting a condition capable of ceasing the funeste enchantment, I will help you fulfill it. I confess that it is difficult to end this enchantment, but the thing does not seem impossible to me. I will see what I can do for you if I take care of this issue. Then he took a book from his dress and, after taking some mysterious steps, sat in front of a table and read for a considerable time, with an application that made it perspire. Then he closed the book and plunged into a deep meditation. I had such a serious air that, for a while, it made us think that my misfortune was irreparable. But he left his ecstasy, his physiognomy recovered his natural beauty, and told us that he had a remedy for our ills. "It's slow," he said, "but it will be safe. Keep your secret, that nobody discovers it, and that no one knows that you are hidden under that horrible costume, since you would get me the power to get rid of it. Your enemy gives a discounted that you will disseminate him, so he has not deprived you of speech." It seemed to the queen that this condition was impossible to respect, because 2 of her maidens had witnessed the fatal adventure, and both had been horrified, which would not have stopped exciting the curiosity of the guard and the courtiers. He imagined that the whole court was aware of what happened, and that his kingdom and even the entire universe would soon know, but the fairy had a means to prevent the mystery from revealing. He then made some passes, sometimes slow and sometimes precipitated. He accompanied them with words that we did not understand and ended up raising his hand, with the appearance of a person who orders with absolute power. That gesture, together with the words he had pronounced, was so powerful that all those who breathed in the castle were motionless and were transformed into statues. They are still in the same state. They are the figures that you have seen in different places, and in the same attitudes in which the peremptory orders of the fairy surprised them. The queen, who at that time glanced at the big courtyard, received the change suffered by a prodigious number of people. The silence that suddenly followed the agitation of a crowd was born in the heart of the queen feelings of compassion for so many innocent who lost their lives for my cause. But the fairy reassured her, telling her that she would leave her subjects in that state only while her discretion needed. It was a precaution that had to be taken, but the fairy promised that it would reward them and that the time they spent like that would not be discounted from the sum of their days. "They will be the younger the more you sleep, Caesar, therefore, your piety," the fairy told the queen. "Let's leave them here with your child. In this place it will not run risks, because I have just made them lift mist so thick in the surroundings of the castle that it will be impossible for someone to enter, unless we consider it necessary. And to you, ma'am, am going to take you where your presence is necessary. You have to anticipate the actions of your enemies. Occupy of making known that the fairy that raised your child retains it with her, for reasons of great importance, and that it also retained all the people who accompanied you here. It was not without shed tears as my mother was forced to leave me." The fairy renewed him the promise of always watching for me, and assured him that he would fulfill everything I could desire. He added that my misfortunes would end, as long as she or I did not put obstacles with some imprudence. All those promises were unable to comfort my mother. I would have wanted to stay with me and leave the fairy, or to whom she would judge more dignified, the government of her kingdom. But fairies order imperatively and want to be obeyed. My mother, who was afraid to increase my misfortune with a refusal and deprive me of the help of that well-Hecra intelligence, agreed to do everything that was required. He saw a beautiful float arrive, thrown by the same white deer that brought it today. The fairy made the queen upload with her. He barely had time to kiss me. His interest claimed it elsewhere, and was aware that a longer permanence in these places would have harmed me. With extraordinary speed, she was taken to the site where she camped her army. No one was surprised to see her arrive in that way. Everyone believed that he was with the old fairy, because the one that accompanied her did not let himself be seen and left immediately. He did it to come to this place, which, in an instant, embellished with everything that his art and his imagination could provide him. This helpful fairy also allowed me to add everything that I could please, and after doing for me everything I could left me alone, urging me to be encouraged and promising that I would come from so long as to communicate the hopes that I was conceiving in my favor. I seemed to be alone in this palace. However, I was only with the naked eye. It was served as if I had been in the middle of my court, and my occupations were more or less the same as you had later. I read, I went to the theater or the opera, cultivated a garden that I had done to distract me, and everything I did like me. What planted did not take more than a day to achieve perfection. The bundle of roses did not need much more, to which I owed the joy of seeing you here. My well man came to see me very often. His promises and his presence attenuated my sorrows. The queen, through her intermediate, received my news and I from her. One day I saw the fairy. Joy shone in his eyes. He told me, "Dear prince, the moment of your happiness is approaching." Then he told me that he who believed your father had spent the night in the forest with great discomfort. In a nutshell, he informed me of the event that I had made it on my way, without revealing your authentic lineage. He told me that the good man was forced to come to look for a refuge against the evils he had endured in the last 20-4 hours. "I'm going to give orders to receive it," he told me. "It is necessary to give it a pleasant reception. He has a lovely daughter. I intend to be the one who frees you." I paid attention to the conditions that my cruel companion put to cancel your enchantment. It is a luck that has not ordered that one who has to free yourself comes for love to you. On the contrary, he said he will have to fear death, and even expose himself to it voluntarily. I have imagined a way to force her to take that step. It consists in making him believe that his father's life is in danger, and that he has no other way to save him. I know that not to give expenses to that old man, he only asked for a rose, while his sisters overwhelmed him with foolish orders. As soon as he finds a favorable occasion, he will fulfill his desire. Lift yourself in the bundle and, jumping on it as soon as you have begun to cut roses, make you fear that death is the punishment of your audacity, unless you give you any of your daughters, or, better yet, that it is voluntarily delivered, in accordance with the law prescribed by our enemy. That man has, in addition to the one that destinies you, 5 other daughters. None of them is generous enough to save his father's life at his own. Only Beautiful is capable of that noble action. I fulfilled the orders of the fairy to the letter. You know, beautiful princess, how well everything came out. The merchant, to save his life, promised me what he asked. I saw him leave without being able to persuade me that he would return to you. I wanted it, and I did not dare to excite myself. How many evils I suffered throughout the month, I asked me. I just wanted to see him finish to be safer of my misfortune. He could not imagine that a beautiful and charming young woman had the courage to come to meet a monster that, she believed, would make her prey. Even when I had sufficient firmness, it was necessary to stay with me, without being allowed to regret his actions, and that seemed to me an unsurpassed obstacle. In addition, how could I have endured my presence without dying of fright? I lived my miserable life in those sad reflections, and I was never more worthy of pity. The month, however, came to an end and my protector announced your arrival. You remember, without a doubt, the pomp with which you were received. As I did not dare to show you my joy with words, I turned to magnificence. The fairy, full of concern for me, forbade me to make me known, no matter how fear that I could inspire you, or because of great kindness that you show me. I was not allowed to try to please you or demonstrate my love, let's even reveal who it was. I could only be worth an extreme kindness, since, luckily, the malignant fairy had forgotten to prohibit me from evidence of her. Those laws seemed hard to me, but I had to accept them, and I took the resolution to introduce myself in front of you only a few moments per day, of shunning the long conversations, to prevent my heart from surrendering to love. You arrived, lovely princess, and the first look that I threw you produced in me a totally opposite effect to which my monstrous figure had to produce in you. Seeing and loving you immediately were one and the same thing for me. Just trembling I entered your rooms, and my joy was immense to see that you standing to see me more intrepidity than I had to endure it. When you declared me that you agreed to stay with me, my joy had no limits. Because of an effect of self-love that remained in me even in the most frightful way, I thought I perceived that you were not as repulsive as you had imagined. Your father left. But my pain grew when I thought that, apparently, I could only like it on the condition that you had strange tastes. Your behavior, your words, as sensible as modest, everything in you made me known that you only acted for principles that dictated reason and virtue. That was what did not allow me to excite myself with the hope of some happy whim. I felt desperate of not being able to use other terms that were not the fact that the fairy had dictated to me, and that she had chosen, on the way, low and puerils. In vain I made him see that it was not natural for you to accept the proposal to bed with me. To that he only replied, patience, perseverance, or everything is lost. To compensate for my ridiculous conversation, he assured me that I was going to give you all kinds of pleasures, and to me the advantage of seeing you continuously, without frightening you and without being forced to tell you impertinences. The fairy made me invisible, and I had the satisfaction of seeing how they served you equally invisible spirits, or that were shown in different animal forms. Moreover, the fairy, directing your dreams, showed you an appearance of my figure at night, and during the day I made me look at me in my portraits, and allowed me to talk to you through dreams, just as I thought and how I would have really spoken to you. You confused my secret and my hopes, that the fairy encouraged you to fill, and thanks to a magical mirror, I was witnessing your conversations and saw in them everything you imagined or everything you thought. That situation was not enough to make me happy. It was only in dreams, and my misfortunes were real. The extreme love you had inspired me forced me to complain about the conditions in which I lived, but my condition became much sadder when I realized that this beautiful place had no charms for you. I saw you shed tears that crossed my heart, and that, I thought, could lead to my loss. You asked me if I was alone here, and little was missing, so that, abandoning my stupidity simulation, I swore that it was. I would have done it with terms that would have surprised you, making you suspect that it was not as rough as I wanted to seem. I was even about to make it known when the fairy, invisible to you, appeared before my eyes. With his threatening air, which terrified me, he found the secret to silence me. What a means used my God to impose silence! He approached you with a dagger in his hand and told me with a sign that the first word that I said would cost you life. I was so scared that I resumed, naturally, the stupidity that she ordered me to simulate. My sorrows were not over. You manifested your desire to go to your father's house. I allowed you without hesitation. Could something deny you? But I saw your departure as a death sentence, and without the care of the fairy would have succumbed. During your absence, this generous intelligence never abandoned me. He preserved my own fury. I would have abandoned him, since I did not dare to excite myself with your return. The time you had spent in this palace returned my most unbearable situation than I had initially been, since I considered me the most unfortunate of all men, without the hope of being able to tell you. The sweetest of my occupations was to travel the places to which you were most often, but my penalty increased to not seeing you there. The nights and the hours when I had the pleasure of talking with you a moment increased my affliction, and were even more cruel. Those 2 months, the longest in my life, ended at last, and I didn't see you return. It was then that my misfortune reached the height, and the power of the fairy was too weak to prevent me from succumbing to my despair. The precautions he took to prevent me from attacking my life were useless. I had a sure medium that escaped his power. It consisted of stopping feeding. Thanks to the force of his arts, he had the power to sustain me for some time. But once all his secrets exhausted with me, I began to weaken little by little. Finally, I had nothing left but a moment of life when you arrived to snatch me to death. Your beautiful tears, more effective than all the cordial of the disguised geniuses, retained my soul ready to leave. Knowing, for your regrets, that you felt affection for me, I enjoyed perfect happiness, which came to the height when you accepted me by husband. However, it was not yet allowed to reveal my secret, and the beast was forced to sleep by your side without daring to make you known to the prince. As soon as I was in your bed, my impatience disappeared. You already know that immediately fell into a lethargy that only ended with the arrival of the fairy and the queen. Upon waking me, I found myself as you see me now, without being able to say how the change in me was operated. You were witnessing the rest, but you could not have more than a vague idea of the pain that my mother's stubbornness caused me, who opposed such a fair and honorable wedding for me. I was determined, princess, to be a beast again before losing hope of being the husband of such a virtuous and lovely person. Even when the secret of your lineage would have remained a mystery to me, both thanks and love would have made me feel that, having you as a wife, it would be the happiest of all men. Chapter 3. Thus, the prince finished speaking, and the beautiful one was going to respond when a noise of strident voices and war instruments that, however, did not announce anything sinister. They looked at the window, and the fairy and the queen, who returned from taking their walk, did the same. That noise came from the arrival of a man who, according to appearances, must be a king. The escort that surrounded him had all the signs of real dignity, and he showed in his person an aspect of majesty that did not deny at all the magnificence that accompanied him. That perfectly well-proportioned prince, although he was no longer in his first youth, showed that few had matched him in the spring of his life. He was followed by 12 guards and some courtiers in hunting suit, who seemed as surprised as his boss of being in a castle that was unknown to them. He was paid the same honors that would have corresponded to him in his own states, and everything was made by invisible beings, since they heard cries of joy and fanfare but did not see anyone. The fairy, seeing him appear, told the queen, "There is your brother the king, father of the beautiful, who is not expected to find you here. He will feel both happier then, as you know, he thinks his daughter died a long time ago. He still strange her as much as his wife, who retains an affectionate memory." These words increased the impatience that the young queen and the princess had to kiss the king, so that all descended quickly to the patio, which they reached at the precise moment in which she went down from the horse. The king looked at them without being able to recognize them, but did not hesitate to receive it. I still didn't know what they were fulfilling or what words to use, when the beautiful one threw himself at her feet and hugged her knees, calling him father. The king made her stand up and hugged her affectionately, without understanding why he gave her that name. He imagined that he could be an orphan and oppressed princess who came to implore his protection, and that he only used the most moving terms to obtain what he asked. He was about to assure him that he would do everything he depended on him in his favor, when he recognized his sister the queen, who, hugging him in turn, presented his son. He told her a lot of how much she and he owed her to Belle, and did not hide the horrible adventure she had just finished. The king praised the young princess, and, when he wanted to know his name, the fairy interrupted him to ask if it was necessary, and of the emotion that gives me to see it, I dare not excite myself that it is the daughter I have cried, since I saw the undoubted signs that I had been devoured by wild animals. However, he continued by saying as he examined her again, she looks extraordinarily to the tender and incomparable wife that death snatched me. How the hope of seeing in it the fruit of a lovely marriage whose ties were broken too soon. You can do it, Lord, the fairy replied, the beautiful is your daughter. His lineage is no longer a secret here. The queen and the prince know who she is. I made you come just to inform you of it, but we are not in an appropriate place to tell the details of this adventure. Let's go to the palace, there you will rest for a few moments, and then I will tell you what you want to know. After the joy that you will feel to find a daughter so beautiful and so virtuous, I will give you another news to which you will not be less sensitive. The king, accompanied by his daughter and the prince, was led by the monkeys to the rooms that the fairy had destined. During that time, intelligence took care to return to the statues the freedom to talk about what they had seen. As the queen had pushed her fate, the fairy wanted them to feel for her hands the pleasure of seeing the light again. He gave her magical wand, with which the queen made, following her orders, 7 circles in the air, and then pronounced these words in a natural voice. They returned to life, their king has been saved. All those motionless figures moved and began to walk and act as they did before, remembering only confusingly what had happened to them. After this ceremony, the fairy and the queen went to meet with the king, whom they found talking with the beautiful and the prince. He lavished both of them, and above all, to his daughter, who asked 100 times how he had saved from the fierce beasts that had taken her, without repairing that the first time she had told her that she did not know anything about that and that she had even ignored the secret of her lineage. For his part, the prince spoke without hearing him, repeating 100 times everything he owed to Princess Belle. He would also have wanted to inform the monarch of the promises that the fairy had made him married, and beg him not to refuse to give his kind consent to that marriage. That conversation and those flattery were interrupted by the arrival of the queen and the fairy. The king, who recovered his daughter, knew the immensity of his joy, but still ignored who owed that beautiful gift. Me, said the fairy, and I am the only one who is responsible for explaining the adventure. My good actions will not only be related to you, I also have news to announce that they will not be less pleasant. In such a way, great king, that you can point out this day as one of the happy days of your life. The attendees, seeing that the fairy was about to speak, implied with their silence that they would pay a lot of attention. To respond to his expectation, this was the speech he addressed to the king. The beautiful, lord, and perhaps the prince, are here the only ones who do not know the laws of the happy island. For them I will explain them. To all the inhabitants of this island, and even the king, it is allowed to consult only their own taste in regard to the person with whom they will marry, so that nothing opposes their happiness. By virtue of that privilege, you chose a young pastor you had met during a hunting game. His charms and intelligence made her find worthy of that honor. Any other that was not her, and even dignified girls raised, would have accepted without delay and with joy to be your lover. But virtue made him disregard such offer. You made her climb to the throne, and you gave her a range that humble her of her lineage seemed to exclude her, but that she deserved for the nobility of her character and the beauty of her soul. You can remember that you always had reasons to congratulate yourself for your choice. His affability, his good natural, and his love for you were up to his person's charms. But you did not enjoy much of the pleasure of having it with you. After becoming the father of Belle, you saw you in the obligation to travel to the border of your kingdom to prevent a rebellion conato from which they had informed you. During that time, you suffered the loss of your beloved wife, which moved you the more so that you added to the love that their charms had inspired you the most perfect esteem for their rare qualities. In spite of his much youth and the little education that his birth had given him, you found in it a consumed prudence, and your most skilled courtiers were surprised with the wise advice he gave you and with the media he found so that all your projects were successful. The king, who continued to keep his pain and had the death of that worthy wife always present, could not hear this story without giving new samples of emotion, and the fairy, who realized that this speech moved him, said, "Your sensitivity proved me that you deserve that joy. I do not want to make you present you even more a memory that can only sadden you, but I have to tell you that this supposed shepherd was a fairy, my sister, who, informed that the happy island was a lovely country, and, aware of its laws and the benignity of your government, I wanted to see it. Pastora's clothes were the only costume he chose, in order to enjoy a time of country life. It was there that you found her. His thanks and youth moved you. She abandoned itself without resistances to the desire to know if you had as many charms in the spirit as those I found in your person. He trusted in his quality, and in his power of fairy, that he would put it, when he wanted it, covered with your desires, in case they became import, and the condition under which it appears to you would make you presume that you could miss the respect without consequences. I did not fear the feelings that you could inspire him, and persuaded that his virtue was enough to protect her from the traps of love, she attributed what she felt for you to the simple curiosity of knowing if men still existed in the earth capable of loving the virtue devoid of postiza ornaments, which make it more bright and more respectable for the vulgar of what is in itself, and that it helps to give them the most abominable vices. Docked with this idea, far from fleeing to take refuge in our general asylum, as he had first thought, he wanted to live in a small cabin that had been done in the solitude in which you found her, in the company of a fantastic figure that represented her mother. Those two people seemed to live on the product of an alleged flock that did not fear the wolves, since, in reality, they were nothing more than disguised geniuses. It was in that place where he received your attention. These produced all the effect you could desire. He had no strength to reject the crown when you offered it. You were aware of how much you owed him in a time when you thought she owed everything to you, and you considered that it was better to ignore it. What I reveal to you is a tangible proof that ambition had no part in the consent it gave to your wishes. Do not ignore that we consider the greatest kingdoms as goods we give to whoever pleases. But she noticed your generous behavior, and believing yourself to join such a virtuous man, stunned with that commitment to the point that he did not make any reflection on the danger in which he was going to rush, since our laws expressly prohibit any union with whom they have as power as we are, especially before we are old enough to have authority over the others and enjoy, when the right of preeminence comes. Before that time comes, we are subordinated to the elder fairies, and so that we do not abuse our power we only have to have our people in favor of an intelligence, or a wise whose power is, at least, equal to ours. It is true that, once arrived at the required age, we are owners of contracting the marriage that pleases us, but we do not usually use that right, and it is always for order scandal, which rarely receives this affront, and even in that case it is only some old fairies that almost always pay their extravagance, since they marry young people who despise them. And although they are not punished directly, they already have enough punishment with the abuse of their spouses, of which they are not allowed to take revenge. It is the only penalty we impose. The dislikes, which almost always arrive behind the follies they did, take away the desire to reveal our advantageous secrets to the profane of those who expected consideration and attention. None of those cases was my sister's. Endowed with all the necessary qualities to love, it was further lacking enough, but he let himself be carried away only by love. He was excited that he could keep his marriage secret, and for a while, he succeeded. We do not have to inform ourselves of what fairies do when they are absent. Each one deals with their own matters, and we go to the world to do good or evil, according to our inclinations, without being obliged, when we return, to give an account of our acts, unless we have had a behavior that makes us talk about us, or that some well-beaten fairy, moved with the fate of some unjustly persecuted persecution, bring us their complaints. Finally, it is necessary to some unforeseen event so that we will see the general book, in which what we do is recorded on its own. Out of those occasions, we only have to attend the assembly 3 times a year, and, as we travel very easily, to fulfill that obligation we only have to make an appearance for 2 hours. My sister had to honor the throne, it is the name that we give to that heavy duty when necessary. I had to prepare a hunting game or a pleasure trip, and as soon as we faked some indisposition to be alone locked in her cabinet, or said she had to write or rest. No one realized in your palace, nor any of us, of which he had so much interest in hiding. That was not a mystery to me. The consequences were dangerous, I let him know, but she loved you too much to regret her behavior. Wanting even justifying himself before me, he demanded that he go to see you. Without making you fulfilled, I confess, sir, that if seeing you I did not approve its weakness, at least it was considerably diminished, and the zeal that I put in keeping it hidden. His prevarication remained ignored for 2 years, but finally it was discovered. We have the obligation to make a certain number of good actions in the wide world, of which we are forced to account. When my sister was forced to perform her own, she could only show favors made on the happy island and for the happy island. Several fairies, in a bad mood, censored their way of acting. That is why our queen asked what the reason why he limited his benefice for that very small part of the earth was limited, since he was not allowed to ignore that a young fairy has to travel a lot to make our power and our will to the universe. As that law was not new, my sister had no reasons for refusal or pretext to refuse to obey. He promised that he would undergo her. But the impatience of seeing you again, the fear that they noticed their absence, the impossibility of acting in secret for the throne, did not allow him to move away for a long time and often enough to fulfill his duty, and in the following assembly he could hardly prove that he had been a quarter of an hour outside the happy island. Our queen, irritated with her, threatened to destroy that island to prevent him from continuing to violate our laws. That threat disturbed her so much that even the least insightful of the fairies realized to what extent your wife had attachment to that fatal island, and the evil fairy, which gave this prince the monstrous figure that he had, understood, seeing his confusion, that when he opened the great book he would find there some important information that would allow him to exert his evil influence. Here, he shouted, the truth will be discovered, and we can really know what your behavior has been. Said these words made the entire assembly see what had happened in the last 2 years and read everything out loud and clear. All fairies made a huge uproar when they learned of that uneven union, and covered my sad sister with the cruelest reproaches. It was condemned to the degradation of our order, and to remain prisoner between us. If the punishment of that fault would only have consisted of the first of these sorrows, he would have found comfort. But the second punishment, more terrible than the first, made him feel all the rigor of both. The loss of his dignity cared little, but as he loved you dearly, he asked, with tears in his eyes, to be happy to degrade her, without depriving her of the pleasure of living as a simple mortal with her husband and her beloved daughter. His cries and his pleas moved the youngest of the oldest fairies, and I saw, because of the murmur that occurred, that if at the same time he had voted, he would surely have not had to suffer more than a warning. but one of the oldest, to which because of their great decrepitude we call the Mother of Time, did not give time to the Queen to explain and make known that piety had taken over her heart as well as that of others. This crime should not be tolerated, said that detestable old woman. If he does not punish him, we will be exposed to the same affronts. In this matter, the honor of our order is at stake. This miserable, attached to the earth, does not regret at all the loss of a dignity that puts it above the kings 100 times above what they are above their subjects. He is showing that he turns his affection, his fears and his wishes in his unworthy family. This cruel opinion caused many of those who inclined to clemency return to rigor. As the small number of those who had pushed himself was not considerable enough to oppose the general decision, it was strictly executed, and our same Queen, in whose physiognomy the compassion seemed to be read, regained its severe appearance and confirmed, adding its vote to the majority, the opinion of that bad old. My sister, however, who was looking for how to revoke such a cruel sentence, made you, to move the court and apologize, a portrait so charming that inflamed the heart of the prince's governing fairy. It was the one that had opened the book, but that incipient love only served to redouble the hatred that unfair fairy already had for your sad wife. As I could not resist the yearning I had to see you, he disguised his passion under the pretext of knowing if you deserved that a fairy did the sacrifice that my sister had made for you. As she was in charge of ensuring the prince and had made the assembly approve that guardianship, she would not have dared to abandon him if love, ingenious, would not have inspired the idea of putting a protective genius with a protective genius and two subaltern and invisible fairies, so that they take care of him during his absence. After taking that precaution, she only thought about following her wishes, which took her to the Happy Island. Meanwhile, the ladies and officers of the prisoner queen, surprised that she did not leave her secret cabinet, were prey to the alarm. She had explicitly forbid them to interrupt her, so they let the night without knocking on the door. But since impatience no longer allowed them any other consideration, they hit hard and, as nobody answered them, they threw the door down, without hesitation that an accident had happened to him. The most dire discoveries were expected, but his dismay was not less when he did not find her. They called her, they looked for her in vain. They did not find anything that could relieve the despair caused by their absence. They made thousands of reasoning, some more absurd than others. They could not suspect that their evasion was voluntary. It was almighty in your kingdom, the sovereign power that you had granted to him. Nobody discussed it. Everyone obeyed him with joy. The love you had for each other, the one she had for her daughter and for subjects that made her feel happy, prevented her from having fled. Where could I have gone to be better? For the rest, what man would have dared to kidnap a queen in the middle of his guard and in the remittance of his palace? The path that the kidnappers had taken were immediately known. The misfortune was undoubted, although the circumstances in which it had happened remained hidden. Another more had to fear. It was, Lord, the way you would receive the fatal news. The innocence of those who were responsible for the Queen's person did not give them any peace of mind in terms of the effects of your fair anger. They had to determine to flee from your states, and with that escape, declare themselves guilty of a crime they had not committed, or had to find a way to hide that misfortune. After many deliberations, they only occurred to you that they had died, what they did immediately. They sent an email to inform you that I had fallen sick. A second mail, which came out a few hours later, took you the news of his death. It was for your love not to make you return immediately. Your presence would have destroyed all the precautions on which everyone was based. They were made funeral worthy of their rank, your affection and the grief of a people who adored it, and cried it as sincerely as yourself. That cruel adventure was always a secret to you, although there was no one in all the Happy Island to ignore it. The first surprise had made that misfortune public. The pain you felt for that loss was in proportion to your affection. You just found relief to call the princess by your side. The innocent caresses of that girl were your only comfort. You didn't want to separate from her anymore. She was lovely and presented, incessantly, the living portrait of her mother the Queen. The enemy fairy, who had been the first cause of all the disorder when he opened the great book where he discovered my sister's marriage, did not go to see you without paying for his curiosity. Your presence produced in his heart the same effect as that of your wife, and although that experience did not induce him to apologize, he wanted to commit the same fault. He remained invisible by your side and could not decide to leave you, seeing you inconsolable. It was not excited that success crowned its loves, and as he feared to add the shame of your contempt to the uselessness of his purposes, he did not dare to make himself known. On the other hand, judging necessary to appear, I thought that conquering you with his ingenuity would make you get used to seeing her and perhaps to love her. But for that he had to talk to you and, with a view to getting it, he thought so much in the environment he would use to present himself to you decently that he ended up finding it. There was a neighboring queen to whom a usurper, after killing her husband, had thrown out of her states. That sad princess toured the world looking for asylum and avenger. The fairy kidnapped her and, after putting it in a safe place, he slept her and took her appearance. You, Lord, saw how that fairy disguise was threw at your feet and implored your protection to punish, he said, the murderer of a husband whom she cried as much as you the queen. He assured you that conjugal love was the only reason for his actions and that he gave up a crown that offered his beloved husband. The unfortunates have mercy on each other. You shared his pain, the more so he cried a beloved husband and, mixing his tears with yours, spoke to you incessantly to the queen. You granted your protection, and it did not take long to restore its intended kingdom, punishing the rebels and the usurper as she seemed to wish. But he did not want to return to his country or abandon you. He begged you, for his safety, to govern his kingdom in his name, since you were too generous to accept the present that, giving it to you, would have wanted to do you, and allow him to live in your court. You couldn't deny that new favor. It seemed necessary to raise your daughter, since the skillful Harpia did not ignore that this girl was the only object of your affection. He pretended an extreme affection for her, and had her continuously in her arms. Anticipating the order you were going to do, he strongly asked you to allow him to take care of his education, telling you that he did not want to have any other heir outside that beloved girl, who would also be his and the only object of his love, because, he said, he reminded him of what she had had with her husband and had perished with him. His proposal seemed so convenient that you did not hesitate to give the princess, and even give full power over her. The fairy perfectly fulfilled his task and, thanks to his talent and affection, he won your confidence in full, and you, like a beloved sister, gave him your love. That was not enough for her. All his concern was to become your wife. He did not neglect anything to achieve his goal, but even if you had not been the husband of the most beautiful fairy, she was not made to inspire love. The face he had borrowed could not be compared to that of that place whose place was intended to occupy. Extremely ugly, as she was by nature, she could not have taken a beauty borrowed more than 1 day per year. That little flattering experience made him understand that, in order to succeed, he had to resort to other media that were not beauty. In secret, he conspired to force the people and the great lords to ask you to take a wife, and to be the chosen one. But certain ambiguous explanations that I had given you to give foundation to your dispositions made you know easily where the vehement of requirements with which you cared from. You clearly stated that you did not want to hear about giving your daughter a stepmother, or putting yourself in a situation, by subordinating her to a queen, of making him lose the first range in your states, along with the firm hope of happening to you on the throne. You also gave him to understand that false princess who would like to see her return to her country without protesting and without delay. Once back in his kingdom, you promised that you would provide all the services that can be expected from a faithful friend and a generous neighbor. But you did not hide that, if that decision did not take, there was a risk of having to do it by force. The unsurpassed obstacle that you opposed his love caused him a terrible anger. However, such indifference pretended that he managed to convince you. That attempt was an effect of his ambition and fear that, later, you are seized from his states. Despite the insistence he had to offer them, he preferred to let you believe that he had not done so in good faith rather than to make his true intentions known. His rage was no less violent for staying hidden. Undoubtedly, it was the beautiful one who, more powerful in your heart than politics, made you give up the advantage of extending your empire so glorious, conceived by her as strong as the one she had had for your wife, and took the resolution to get rid of her, since she did not doubt that, once dead, your subjects would renew her pleas. The good woman was almost no longer in the age of giving you But that secretary cared little. The queen whose appearance had taken was young enough to have many yet, and her ugliness was not an obstacle to a real wedding for political reasons. Despite the sincere statement you had made, it was thought that if your daughter died you would yield to the continuous arguments of your advice. It was not even doubted that your choice fell in that false queen, which won innumerable henchmen. That was how, with the help of one of his flatterers, whose wife had her soul as low as him, and that she was as evil as she, decided to get rid of your daughter. He had made that ruling woman of the princess. Among the three they decided to suffocate her, and say that she had died suddenly. But for greater security, they agreed to commit that murder in the nearby forest, so that no one could surprise them during the barbaric execution. They trusted that no one knew anything and it was impossible to accuse them of not having asked for help before it expires, with the legitimate excuse that they were too far away. The ruler's husband intended to seek help after the girl had died, and so that no one could suspect anything, he had to seem surprised to find it in a state that did not admit aid, once he had returned to the place where he would have left the tender victim of his fury. And on the other hand, he prepared studying the pain and surprise he wanted to simulate. I saw you as often I could and as much as prudence allowed me, without running the risk of awakening the suspicions of our enemy, which would have denounced me as a fairy in which fraternal affection prevailed over the honor of the order, and that protected a guilty race. I did not forget anything that served me to convince all the fairies that I had abandoned my sister to her unfortunate luck, and thus trust that it was easier to serve her. As I was attentive to everything your perfidious in love, both for myself and through the geniuses that are under my orders, their horrendous intention did not escape my knowledge. I could not oppose her in an open way, and although it was easy for me to annihilate those in whose hands I had abandoned the little creature, the prudence prevented me, since if I had kidnapped your daughter the malignant fairy would have taken it out without me being possible to defend it. Among us there is a law that forces us to be 1,000 years of age before entering dispute with our elders or, otherwise, we must have been snakes. The dangers that accompany us in that state make us call it terrible phases. Among us there is nothing that does not tremble at the idea of assuming it. We doubt a long time before resolving ourselves to expose to that state, and without a very urgent reason for hate, love or revenge, there are few who do not prefer to wait for veteran privileges to arrive with the help of time, rather than obtain them in advance by that dangerous medium, in which most succumbs. I was in that situation. They had to spend 10 years to meet the 1,000, and had no more resource than the artifice. I made use of him successfully. I took the form of a monstrous bear and, hiding in the forest destined for that detestable execution, when the miserable ones arrived to fulfill the barbaric order they had received, I threw myself on the woman who took the little girl in her arms and on whose mouth she was already putting her hand. The terror he felt forced her to drop that beautiful load, but he did not save himself with so little, and the horror that his bad nature produced inspired the cruelty of the animal whose figure had taken. I strangled her, as well as the traitor who accompanied her, and took me to Beautiful after quickly undressing her and soaking her clothes with the blood of her enemies. I disseminated them through the forest after taking care to tear them into several parts, so that it could not be thought that the princess had saved, and I retired happy to have done everything so well. The fairy believed that his wishes had been fulfilled. The death of his 2 accomplices suited him, was the absolute owner of his secret, and the end that I had just made them suffered was the one who had reserved for rewarding their guilty services. Another circumstance that was favorable was that the shepherds who had seen from afar the incident ran to ask for help. Those who came did quickly enough to find those infamous agonizing and preventing you from any possibility of suspecting that she had something to do with all that. The same circumstances were also favorable for my goals. They convinced the evil fairy of the same as the common of the people. The fact seemed so natural that he had no doubts. He did not even deign to use his power to make sure. His security filled me with joy. I could not have been the strongest if she had wanted to seize the beautiful, because, in addition to the reasons that put her over me, and that I have explained to you, she had the advantage that you had given the girl. You had given an authority against which you were the only one who had power, and, unless you take it out of your hands, nothing could be subtracted from the laws that she wanted to impose until the moment she married. Free of that concern, I was overwhelmed by another when I remembered that the Mother of Time had condemned my niece to marry a monster. But I had not yet turned 3 and I had the illusion of studying, some resource so that that curse was not fulfilled at the bottom of the letter and be able to transform it into an equivocal. I had all the time to think about it, and at that time I only took care of a safe place where I could leave my valuable prey. The mystery was absolutely necessary. I did not dare to give her a castle, or do something magnificent for her. Our enemy would have noticed, there would be some concern, and that would have caused funestas consequences for us. I preferred, then, to dress with simple clothes and confess it to the first individual to find, if it seemed to me a man of good, and in whose house I could be sure that I would find all the comforts of life. Chance soon favored my intentions. I found exactly what I was looking for. It was a little house in a village, whose door was open. I entered that dwelling, which seemed to me that of a well-off peasant. 6, in the light of a lamp, 3 sleeping peasants next to a crib, which seemed like a child's child. The crib had nothing of the simplicity of the rest of the room. Everything in her was sumptuous. I thought that this creature was sick and that the dream in which their caregivers were mired came from the tiredness of taking care of her. I approached without making noise, with the purpose of seeking some improvement, and I already enjoyed in advance thinking about the surprise that these women would have when they woke up, when they found the cured sick without knowing what to attribute it. I hurried to get the child out of the crib, with the intention of giving him health by blowing on him, but my goodwill was useless. It expired at the moment I touched him. That death immediately inspired me the desire to take advantage of it, and put my niece in the baby's place, if I was lucky enough to be a girl. I had the joy that my wishes were fulfilled. Delighted with that result, I did the change without late and took the little dead, to which I buried. Then I returned to the house, to whose door I made noise to wake up the sleeping ones. I told them, imitating their dialect, which was a stranger who asked for shelter in that night. They won it, and they went to look at the girl, which they found peacefully sleeping and with all the appearances of a perfect health. They were surprised and happy, since they did not realize the deception in which I dropped them by putting a mirage in the eyes. They told me that the girl was the youngest daughter of a rich merchant, that one of them was the nurse, and that, after weaning her, she had returned her to her family, but that the girl had fallen ill in her father's house, who had sent her back to the countryside in the hope that pure air would do her well. They added with satisfied air, looking at the little girl, that the experience had been successful and had a better effect than all the remedies that had been used before returning it. They resolved that they would take her to the father back as soon as she woke up, so as not to delay the satisfaction she would feel and for which they trusted to receive a great reward, because she had taken an extreme affection for that girl, even if she was the last one of 11 children. They left at dawn and I, for my part, pretended that I followed my way, congratulating me for having put my niece in such a good situation. To increase his safety more and make the supposed father attached to the girl, I took the figure of one of those women who say the good Ventura and, finding me at the merchant's door at the time the peasants arrived, I entered with them. He received them with joy and, when he took the girl in his arms, he was fooled by the prejudices of paternal love, firmly believing that his entrails were moved to see her. They were just the impulses of his good nature, which he confused with the paternal instinct. I took that moment to increase the love I imagined feeling. "Look well at this little girl, my good lord," I said with the usual language of those people whose appearance had taken. "Will be a great honor for your family, will give you great goods and will save your life and your children. It will be so beautiful, that they will call it all those who see it." In reward for my prediction he gave me a gold coin and I retired very happy. There was nothing left that forced me to live with Adam's race. To take advantage of my free time I went to our empire, resolved to stay there for some time. I dedicated myself quietly to comfort my sister, news her dear daughter and expressing that, far from having forgotten, you saved her memory with the same love you had for her person. Such was, great king, the situation in which we were while you were overwhelmed by the new misfortune that your daughter had deprived you, and that renewed the pains that had made you feel the loss of her mother. Even if you could not specifically accuse that accident to the one you had entrusted, It was, however, impossible not to look at it with bad eyes, because although there was no evidence that it was guilty, it could not justify the negligence committed, that the facts had become a criminal. Once the first outbursts of your affliction have passed, she preserved that there would no longer be any obstacle that prevented you from marrying her. He made his emissaries renew the marriage proposal, but he disappointed, and his mortification was extreme, when you declared that you not only had as little intention as before getting married again, but even in the case that you would change their minds, it would never be in his favor. To that statement I added the urgent order to leave your kingdom. His presence reminded you of your daughter and renewed your pain. That was the pretext of the one you served, but the main reason you had was to end the continuous intrigues with which he tried to achieve his goals. The fairy felt outraged, but had to obey without being able to take revenge. I had entrusted to one of our old women who protected you. He had great power, because he joined his veteran the advantage of having been snake 4 times. Just as there is an extreme danger in doing so, there are also honors and an increased power united at that risk. That fairy, due to consideration towards me, took you under his protection and took away your furious in love with the possibility of doing any damage. That setback favored the princess whose appearance had taken. The fairy made her out of her dream and, hiding the criminal use she had made of her features, only made her see the favorable side of her actions. He did not forget to highlight his good offices and the work he had saved him, and to continue his own character, he gave him good advice to behave. It was then that, trying to comfort your indifference, he returned next to the prince and renewed his attention. He took affection, came to love him too much, and, not being able to love him, made him feel the terrible consequences of his rage. Meanwhile, the moment of my veteran had come without realizing, and my power increased. But the desire to be useful to my sister, and I was persuaded that it was not enough. As my sincere friendship hid the danger of dangerous phases, I wanted to go through them. I became a snake and happily overcome that test. That gave me the possibility of acting without mysteries in favor of those who are oppressed by our bad companions. If I cannot always completely destroy the funeral enchantments, I often have the power to do so, and, at least, I can always diminish them with my power and my advice. My niece belonged to the number of those to which I cannot completely favor. As I did not dare to show the interest he had in her, it seemed more convenient to leave him his status as the daughter of the merchant. Under different forms I was going to see her often, and always satisfied. His virtue and beauty matched his intelligence. At 14 he had already shown an admirable record in the good and in the bad fortune for which his supposed father had to pass. I was delighted to know that the cruelest setbacks had not been able to disturb their tranquility. On the contrary, with his joy, with his affable conversation, he had imposed his duty to return it to his father and his brothers, and I was pleased to see that I had feelings worthy of his lineage. But that liking was mixed with the cruelest bitterness when he remembered that so many perfections were destined for a monster. I took vainly, night and day, to find the means of saving her from such a great misfortune, and I despaired because I didn't think of anything. That restlessness did not prevent me from making frequent trips to your palace. Your wife, who was not free to do it, asked me for all the time to see you, and despite the protection of our friend, her alarmed love always persuaded her that the moments when I lost sight of you were the last of your life, and those with which our enemy barked her furor. That apprehension disturbed her so much that I barely gave me time to rest. When I was going to give accounts of the state in which you were, I begged me so much that I turned to your side that it was impossible for me to deny me. Moved by her concern, and with the desire more to make her cease to save me the sorrows she caused me, I used our barbaric companion of the same weapons that she had used against us, and I went to open the great book. Luckily I opened it on the page of the conversation he had with the queen and the prince, the same one that ended with his metamorphosis. I did not miss a word, and I was very happy, because, to be safer of her revenge, she destroyed, without knowing it, the damage that the Mother of Time had made us, by submitting Beautiful to the destiny of having to marry a monster. The best of all was that I put such advantageous conditions that it seemed that I would have done it on purpose and with the sole intention of doing a favor, since I gave my sister's daughter occasion to prove that she was worthy of getting out of the purest blood of the fairies. A sign, the slightest gesture, expresses among us everything the vulgar would not be able to pronounce in 3 days. I only said a word of contempt, and that was enough to make the assembly known that our enemy had sentenced himself with the sentence he had pronounced 10 years before against your wife. At my sister's age it seemed more natural to have weakness of love than in the case of a fairy of the first order, and with many more years. I speak of the bejesus and the bad actions that had accompanied that extemporaneous love. I made that if so many infamies were unpunished, it would be right who said that fairy was only in the world to dishonor nature and afflict the human race. Teaching them the book, I summarized my abrupt harangue with a single word: look. That is why it was less convincing. I also had young and old friends, who treated old in love as deserved. He had not been able to marry you. To that punishment was added the dishonor of being degraded from the order, and then the treatment was only granted due to the Queen of the Happy Island. That advice was developed while she was with you. As soon as it appeared, the result was communicated. I had the pleasure of witnessing. After which, closing the book, I descended precipitously from the average air region, where our empire resides, to oppose the effective despair to which you were about to abandon you. It soon did more time to make that trip than I had put my laconic harangue. I came immediately to promise my help. All kinds of reasons invited me to it. Your virtues, your misfortunes, he told the prince, turning to him. The advantage he found for beautiful, made me see in you the monster I needed. Both seemed worthy of each other, and I did not doubt that, when they met, their hearts would become justice. You know, he told the queen, what I did since then to achieve my goal, and what were the means with which I forced the beautiful to come to this palace, where the presence of the prince and her conversation, of which I made her enjoy in dreams, supplied the effect she expected. They inflamed their heart without making their virtue falter, and without that love having power to weaken the duty and thanks that bound it to the monster. Anyway, I could happily complete my plan in all its details. Yes, Prince, the fairy continued, you have nothing to fear from your enemy. He has been stripped of his power, and will never become able to harm you with new enchantments. You have fulfilled all the conditions that had imposed you, since, if you had not fulfilled them, they would continue standing despite the eternal fall and disgrace of the fairy. You have made you love without the help of your intelligence and your crib, and you, beautiful, are also free from the curse that the mother of the times had thrown you. You agreed to take a monster for husband. She has nothing to demand. Everything is now at the service of your happiness. The fairy finished speaking and the king threw himself at his feet. Excelsa, he said, how could you thank you for all the favors that you were worth filling my family? The thanks I feel for your help is infinitely above any word. But August, my sister, he added, this name is encouraged to ask you for other Mercedes. And despite everything I owe you, I can't stop telling you that I will never be happy as long as I see myself deprived of the presence of my dear fairy. What he did, what he suffers for me, would increase my love and my pain if one and the other would not have already reached their maximum expression. Ah, lady, he added, couldn't you complete your favors making it see? This order was useless. If the fairy had been able to provide that service, it was too solicitous to wait for him to ask for it. But he could not destroy what the fairy council had ordered. As the young queen was a prisoner in the middle region of the air, there was no imaginable way to let her see the king, and the fairy was going to understand it gently and urged him to have patience, waiting for some unforeseen event from which she would know how to take advantage, when a charming symphony was heard that interrupted her. The king, his daughter, the queen and the prince were ecstatic, but the fairy had another kind of surprise. That music indicated the triumph of the fairies, and she did not understand who could be the winner. The old woman was presented to mind, or the mother of time, who, during her absence, had obtained, perhaps, her freedom, the other permission to put new obstacles to her lovers. She was plunged into that perplexity when she pleasantly released her the presence of her sister Hadda, the queen of the Happy Island, who suddenly appeared in the middle of that lovely assembly. She was no less beautiful than when the king, her husband, had lost her. The monarch, who immediately recognized her, leaving aside the respect she owed to her for the love she had kept for her, hugged her in an outburst of joy that surprised the same queen. His sister Hadda could not imagine the happy prodigy to which the newcomer owed his freedom, but the crowned fairy told her that she only owed her joy to her own courage, which had led her to risk her life for another. "You know," he said to the fairy, "that our queen's daughter was received in the order since her birth, but that she does not owe the existence of a sublunar father since she received her from the wise Amatabak, that he honors the fairy with her alliance and that, thanks to her sublime science, she is much more powerful than us. In spite of that, your daughter cannot stop transforming in a snake when she turned her first 100 years." That fatal term arrived, and our queen, who is such an affectionate mother with that beloved girl who is alarmed both for her luck as a common creature could do it, could not decide to leave her at the risk of running an accident that, in that state, could perish. He remembered the misfortunes that, in his first youth, had seen suffering those who succumbed, something too common not to justify their fears. The painful situation in which I was removed all hope of seeing my lover husband and my adorable daughter. I felt a complete rejection for a life that had to go separate from them, so, without hesitation, I made the decision to offer myself to replace and replacement of the young fairy. I saw in that, with joy, a safe, fast and honorable way to get rid of all the misfortunes that overwhelmed me. Either with death or with a glorious freedom that, making me own my luck, allowed me to meet my husband. Our queen doubted so little to accept that offer, so flattering for maternal love, as I had doubted to do it. He kissed me 100 times and promised me that I would restore all my privileges, which would give me freedom without conditions if I had the happiness of that danger. I managed to overcome it without mishaps. The fruit of my efforts was attributed to the young fairy on behalf of who exposed myself, and immediately started again in my own benefit. The good success of my first phase gave me courage for the second, in which I was equally successful. That action allowed me to achieve the condition of old woman, and consequently, made me independent. It soon took advantage of my freedom to come here and meet with such a dear family. When Queen Hadda finished instructing her affectionate auditorium, mutual licenses recommended. That was a lovely confusion. The fulfillment were going and went without anyone heard almost anything, especially the beautiful, delighted to belong to parentela so illustrious and no longer have to fear dishonoring his cousin the prince, making him contract an unworthy marriage of him. But although he felt aware of happiness, he did not forget the good man he had taken for his father. He reminded his father's promise that he would have, along with his children, the honor of attending the wedding party. I was still talking about that when, through the window, they saw 16 people on horseback, most of them with hunting horns, which seemed to be baffled. The disorder of that group was enough to understand that the horses had forced them. The beauty easily recognized the 6 children of good man, his sisters and his 5 promised. Everyone, except the fairy, was surprised at this abrupt appearance. Those who arrived were not surprised less when they were transported by the impetus of their horses to a palace that was unknown to them. This is how this event happened to them. They were all hunting when their horses, gathering in a squad, ran until they reached the palace, without being able to stop them despite all the efforts they had made. The beautiful, forgetting her new dignity, hastened to meet them to reassure them. He kissed them all kindly. The old man who had raised her also appeared, but without disorder. The horse had gone to whistle and scratch his door. He had had no doubt that he was going to look for him from his beloved daughter. He mounted it without fear and, as he guessed where he wore him, he was not surprised to meet in the courtyard of a palace that he saw again for the 3rd time, and where he thought he was driven to attend the weddings of Belle and the Beast. As soon as he saw her, she ran to her with open arms, blessing the happy moment that put her in front of her eyes, and filling the generous beasts that allowed her return, looked everywhere in order to thank her with all humility with the benefits with which she filled her family and, above all, the youngest of her daughters. He opposed not seeing her and feared that her conjectures were false. However, the presence of his children induced him to believe that his thoughts were correct and that they had not been taken to that place unless it was a solemn party, as the wedding should be. The good man made these reflections to his deep ones, which did not prevent him from affectionately strengthening the beautiful in his arms, wetting his face with the tears that made him spill the joy. After letting him enjoy that bliss, The fairy finally told him, "Brown, good man, you have sufficiently lavished your caresses to this princess. It is time for you to stop looking at her as a father and know that this title does not belong to you. From now on, you must pay tribute as your sovereign. She is the princess of the Happy Island, daughter of the king and the queen who you see here, and will become the wife of this prince. This is his mother, the queen, sister of the king. I am a friend fairy and I am Aunt de la Bella. As for the prince," he added, seeing that the good man nailed his eyes, "it is better known to you than you think, but now it is different from what it was when you saw it. In a nutshell, it is the beast in person." Upon hearing so surprising new ones, the father and the brothers were very happy, while the sisters felt painful jealousy, but they disguised them with the appearances of a feigned satisfaction that did not deceive anyone, despite which they all pretended to believe that they were sincere. As for the lovers, to whom the hope of possessing Bella had made inconstant, and that they had returned to their first chains just because they desperate to conquer her, they did not know what to think. The merchant could not stop crying, unable to decide if his tears came from the pleasure of seeing the happiness of beautiful, or the pain of losing such a perfect daughter. His children felt agitated by the same feelings. The beautiful, extremely sensitive to the love they showed her, begged those who now depended, as well as the prince, her future husband, that would allow her to thank such an endearing affection. His plea showed so much the goodness of his heart that it was not possible to ignore him. All were filled with assets, and by funny consent of the king, the prince and the queen, the Bella retained for them the affectionate names of a father, brothers and even sisters, despite the fact that he did not ignore that the latter were as little for the heart as for the blood. She wanted everyone to continue using the same name with her as they called her when they believed her part of her family. The old man and his children held positions in the court of Bella and continually enjoyed the joy of her in a situation illustrious as to earn them general consideration. As for the suitors of the sisters, whose passion for beautiful would have resurfaced if they had not realized how useless it resulted, they were more than happy by joining the daughters of the good man and marrying people to whom the beauty retained so much goodness. Everyone who wanted them to be present at her wedding had arrived. No more time was delayed, and during the night he followed that happy day the prince was not the victim of the haunting enchantment he had succumbed on the wedding night of the beast. To celebrate that august party, many days passed in the middle of the pleasures. They only ended because the fairy, and of the young wife, warned them that they did not have to take longer to leave that beautiful loneliness, and that they had to return to their states to show themselves to their subjects. It was appropriate that they remind them of their kingdom, and the indispensable duties that claimed them there. Delighted with the place they lived and with the pleasure they felt loving and telling him each other, they had completely forgotten the sovereign greatness, as well as the inconvenience that accompanies her. The new husbands even proposed to the fairy to give up that burden, and that she consented to put in her place to whom she would judge appropriate. But that wise intelligence made them see clearly that they were obliged to fulfill the fate that the government of their peoples had imposed them, as well as those same peoples were to keep them in eternal respect. They yielded to such righteous reproaches, but the prince and the beautiful managed to be allowed to return to that palace to rest from the fatigue inherent to their condition, where they would be treated by the invisible geniuses or by the animals that had accompanied them in recent years. And later, they took advantage of that freedom as possible. His presence seemed to beautify those places. Everything was eager to please them. The geniuses waited for them impatiently, received them with joy and told them in 100 different ways what they felt with their return. The fairy, whose forecast was always alert, gave them a float thrown by 12 white deer with golden and hoof holes, like the ones she had. The speed of these animals almost exceeded that of thought, and with them you could easily turn around the world in 2 hours, so that they did not waste any time on trip. They took advantage of every moment that they could dedicate to pleasure. They also used that galana carroza to often see the king of the Happy Island, his father, who, thanks to the return of Queen Hadda, had rejuvenated so prodigiously that he was not behind in the posture and good appearance of his son-in-law. Like this, he was happy and was equally in love and willing to give continuous evidence of his feelings to his wife, which, on the other hand, responded with all the love that, for so long, had caused his misfortunes. The queen had been received by her subjects, whom she always loved endearing, with outbursts of joy as great as painful had been the ones that caused them with the immense loss of their affection. Nothing was then opposed to his power, which, for many centuries, exercised over them with all the signs of goodwill they could desire, and that, together with the friendship of the Queen of Fairies, he kept his life, health, and youth to her husband the king. Finally, both stopped living, because man cannot last forever. The Queen and her sister Fairy had the same intention for Belle, her husband, her mother the Queen, the old man and her family, so that anyone never saw that he lived so much. The Queen, Prince's mother, did not forget to register this wonderful story in the archives of her empire and that of the Happy Island, to transmit it to posterity. Reports were sent to the entire universe, so that the prodigious adventures of Belle and the Beast were spoken forever.